Chapter 401, Destruction. Nathan whipped his gaze toward the direction the kunai had flown from. The rooftop that had been empty moments ago now held a crossbow cart and two shadowy figures. It wasn't the sudden appearance alone that gave him hope. It was what his Sharingan had already warned him of. If he hadn't sensed something was off, he would never have dared attack in the first place. What really excited him was that only 2 guards manned the cart. In the past, the Hidden Mist always posted 3 ninjas beside each crossbow, 1 sentry to guard against surprise assaults, and 2 to load and fire. With that third guardian gone, their chances of a swift counterstrike were slim. Nathan swept his eyes over the battlefield one last time. The other crossbow crews hadn't trained their weapons on him. Seizing the opening, he spun 180 degrees and raced back toward the rooftop, every ounce of momentum propelling him into the heart of the enemy position. Nathan watched impassively as the Hidden Mist Chunin's counterattack fizzled out. The Chunin's eyes widened. He launched a flurry of kunai, hoping to halt him. But the knives were too slow. Nathan's Sharingan iris shifted, chakra wings unfurled behind him, and he drifted over the incoming blades with the grace of a butterfly skimming petals. Closing the gap in an instant, Nathan pressed his hands together and unleashed his ninjutsu, Fire Release, Dragon Flame Technique. He inhaled deeply, then expelled a scorching torrent of fire chakra swirled with gusting wind. From the conflagration sprang a colossal dragon of flame that shot forward over 10 meters, crashing into the 2 mist ninjas and their crossbow cart. Ah! The pair's screams were drowned by the roar of the inferno as they were engulfed, their bodies erupting into living torches amid the blaze. The wooden cart behind them ignited in an instant, its wheels turning into smoldering embers. Even as the flames danced and crackled, Nathan wasn't finished. Calmly, he withdrew another kunai from his pouches and flung it toward the survivors. Nathan hurled a flaming kunai through the haze. It tore through the blaze and drove itself deep into the side of the nearest crossbow cart. A split second later, a deafening roar ripped through the air as the cart erupted in a cascade of shrapnel and fire. Satisfied, Nathan gave a curt nod and vaulted skyward. But that brief moment of triumph had alerted the other mist ninjas. One after another, hidden crossbow platforms peeled away their camouflage on the surrounding rooftops, unleashing a storm of explosive-tipped bolts to block his escape. Nathan's Sharingan rolled in his eyes, locking onto each projectile as it arced toward him. In a heartbeat, he calculated every trajectory, then flexed the wings sprouting from his back to weave and dodge through the deadly volley. Each blast shook him with concussive force. Fragments whistled past his ears and nicked his cloak, but none landed a serious blow. When the last bolt detonated harmlessly below, Nathan hung in the air, scanning the ruined carts. That's when he noticed it. Several of the platforms weren't mere firing positions at all, but raised launch decks built into the carts themselves, perfect for deploying fresh squads of ninjas at a moment's notice. He narrowed his eyes. The real battle was only beginning. Only 2 mist ninja remained at the crossbow carts. Nathan scanned the field and saw the mist commander urgently calling in reinforcements. Now was his chance. He traced a quick arc through the air with his hand, channeling chakra, and then sprinted straight for the lightly defended carts. "Open fire!" he barked to the nearby gunners. "Right! Keep shooting!" they yelled back, but by the time the mist ninja fumbled through reloading their heavy crossbows, Nathan had already slipped out of range. Seizing the moment, Nathan unleashed his wind-style wind wings, riding a powerful gust to close the gap in under 3 seconds. In a blink, he was within 20 meters of the carts. Without hesitation, he drew several kunai and flung them in a deadly fan at the nearest cart. Sparks trailed each blade. Tiny detonator talismans affixed to their shafts flared with ominous light, primed to explode on contact. Nathan hadn't foreseen exactly when the opening would come. He'd merely spent the past few days laying the groundwork, and today everything finally clicked into place. As the first kunai whistled toward him, the nearby mist ninjas, poised to fire the crossbow carts, dropped their levers and scrambled instead for shuriken and kunai to intercept the attack. A faint smile curved Nathan's lips. He lifted his hands, wove the seals in a blur, then thrust them forward and called out his ninjutsu. Fire style, Phoenix Fire Technique, In an instant, dozens of fiery spheres, like smoldering phoenix eggs, erupted from his mouth, arcing through the air like petals in a gust of wind. The sudden onslaught threw the mist ninjas into disarray, leaving them no time to operate their crossbow carts. Seizing his advantage, Nathan flowed seamlessly into two more jutsu: fire style, great fireball technique, and then wind style, wind blade. In the blink of an eye, 3 crossbow carts exploded in a rain of splintered wood and shrapnel. Smoke and embers swirled around him as the deafening blasts faded. Nathan stood, calm and unscathed, ready for whatever came next. One of Kirigakure's crossbow carts had already been put out of commission, too damaged to be used anytime soon. That loss left their arsenal down to just 16 carts, a full quarter of their firepower gone. Nathan's chakra wings fluttered behind him as he weaved through a hail of bolts from one of the remaining carts. Then, gathering speed, he shot toward another. A 3-man crew stood ready beside it. 2 technicians gripped the winding handles and took aim, while the third took a step forward and launched his own attack. With a roar, the third ninja expelled a concentrated jet of flame from his mouth, a beam of fire as precise as a laser. Nathan's eyes narrowed. He formed the hand seals in a flash and called out his jutsu. Water, escape, water array wall. In an instant, a broad curtain of water materialized in front of him, intercepting the fiery beam with a sharp, sizzling crackle. Nathan barely had time to react when a crossbow bolt whistled toward him. He sidestepped without hesitation. As his assailant reloaded the weapon, Nathan's fingers flew through a series of seals. With a whisper of chakra, he unleashed his ninjutsu, Wind Escape, Wind Blade. A translucent, razor-sharp wind blade sprang into being and hurtled back at the enemy. "Watch out!" one of the mist shinobi cried, but it was already too late. In a single sweeping arc, the wind blade tore through the wooden crossbow cart and the 2 shinobi manning it, cleaving both their bodies in half. "Hiroichi, Haruna!" the surviving operative yelled in horror, though he spoke too late to save his comrades. The lone mist shinobi staggered back, rage flaring in his eyes. He slammed his palms together, channeling his chakra for a counterattack. "Fire style, great fireball technique." Flames roared to life in his mouth before he expelled a massive sphere of fire straight at Nathan. Nathan's eyes glinted with interest as the infernal orb streaked toward him. He braced himself, already calculating his next move. Chapter 402. Trap. Everyone knows fire style, great fireball technique, is the Uchiha clan's trademark ninjutsu. Yet at this critical moment, the Kirigakure shinobi standing before Nathan dared to use it against him. What on earth was he thinking? If he'd concealed his command of fire chakra, fine, but he'd just unleashed a flurry of flame techniques. Did he really believe Nathan was unaware? Besides, the wavering form of that fireball betrayed his incompetence. Such audacity! Nathan shook his head and put thought aside. He formed a hand seal in a heartbeat, channeling his chakra into the same fabled jutsu. Flames kindled at his lips, then burst forth as a colossal roaring fireball, the very fire style, great fireball technique. With a deafening crash, the 2 spheres of flame met in midair. The Kirigakure ninja's attack shattered instantly, dissolving into a shower of sparks that rained down around them. Nathan's blazing orb, however, pressed on unscathed, hurtling directly toward his opponent. Nathan's opponent was quick. Before the fireball could strike, he vanished with a puff of smoke, classic substitution technique. Unfazed, Nathan flexed his concentration and sprouted great wings of chakra, intending to glide away from the cramped rooftops. But 3 beams of searing light shot up from the surrounding buildings, converging just above him. He froze in midair. In an instant, 3 translucent curtains solidified from that focal point, forming a triangular pyramid cage around him. "Kekai," Nathan murmured, the unmistakable ceiling barrier. Scanning his prison, he saw dozens of mist shinobi pouring onto the roofs and ledges, hemming him in, and among them were more familiar faces than he liked: Terumi Mei, Qing, Shuifeng, and other mist ninjas who had clashed with him before. It hit him then that this was no random ambush. They'd lured him here, even pulling some of their crossbow teams away so they could trap him single-handedly. Cornered but calm, Nathan settled onto his perch. The seals glowed around him, but he had a few tricks left, if he could break the barrier before they closed in. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he watched the mist ninja scramble to shore up the defenses. It was galling that such a vital mechanism could harbor a flaw so glaringly obvious, one that only now, in the heat of battle, the enemy had bothered to correct. In the end, it had all begun with Nathan's own opportunistic strike. At the time, he'd seen a chance to thin their ranks and seized it without a second thought. Now, reflecting on how the first chariot-mounted crossbow had failed and how several more had been destroyed in his ambush, he suspected those positions had been deliberately weak, bait, laid from the very start. And then the ceiling barrier had sprung to life around him, snapping shut like a cage. Of course, it had all been a trap designed to lure him in. Genius, he muttered with a rueful chuckle. Anger and grudging respect flared inside him, but his frustration was short-lived. Any shinobi would have found this situation confounding, bullied by a hidden foe, hemmed in by an inescapable seal. Not Nathan. He took a steadying breath and studied the translucent wall of light that now contained him. What he'd given confinement, he'd just as easily take by surprise. The real game was only beginning. Nathan stood silent as the ceiling barrier before him shimmered faintly. This formation was nothing like the sprawling four-mist ceiling array he'd encountered last time, smaller, tighter, and noticeably more solid. The hidden mist village had clearly learned from their earlier failure when he'd slipped right through their defenses. Now they deployed a different array, one they hoped would hold him fast. They underestimated him. No matter how intricate the seal, unless it could instantly nullify his Mangekyo Sharingan, it was irrelevant. The power of his Heaven's Guardian technique transcended such barriers. If Nathan chose to, he could shatter this seal and walk free in an instant. Yet, he wasn't eager to make his escape. For, now, it was wiser to conceal the existence of his Mangekyo Sharingan. With a casual sweep of his gaze, Nathan took note of the figures assembled beyond the barrier. Mist shinobi, ranked and veteran alike, had streamed inside under the command of their senior ninja. Interesting, he murmured. Something about the scene didn't add up. Once a ceiling barrier was fully activated, it was supposed to be an absolute boundary. No one could pass in or out. If Nathan found himself trapped within, then these intruders should have been barred entry just as securely. He frowned, curiosity flickering across his features as he prepared to uncover exactly how and why the rules of this lock had been rewritten. Nathan watched in fleeting disbelief as the mist ninjas strode into the courtyard. A closer look revealed talismans affixed to their clothes, enchanted seals that cloaked their presence until the perfect moment. They had clearly come prepared. Good, the more chaos, the better his chances to slip away unnoticed. With that thought, Nathan's hands flashed into a hand seal, intent on activating his own jutsu. But before he could complete the formation, dozens of razor-sharp shurikens whistled toward him, each one aimed at a vital point. Someone among the attackers had no intention of letting him cast. Undeterred, Nathan divided his focus halfway through his seal while twisting aside to narrowly dodge the lethal projectiles. Yet this initial volley was just a prelude. From all directions, more kunai and shurikens rained down, and some of those thrown weapons bore small explosive talismans. Cornered, Nathan realized he couldn't finish the seal under such relentless fire. He abandoned the attempt and spiraled his Sharingan into action. Crimson Tomoe swirled as he spread his chakra wings, lifting himself just high enough to sidestep incoming blades. All the while, his eyes tracked each detonating tag, ready to dodge the burst of flames when they erupted. Boom! 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 Explosions rocked the arena in rapid succession. Each blast unleashed a scarlet fireball that lit up the night, banishing the darkness. From within the last conflagration, a lone figure sprang forth, just as a thick white mist began to pour in, seeping into every corner of the barrier. Blazing mist technique, someone gasped. Stay sharp, snapped a senior ninja from the mist village. He raised his hands to mold chakra, preparing a wind release to blow the fog away. But before he could act, a calm, authoritative voice rang out across the grounds. Everyone, look up, he's breaking out from above. It was Nathan. His warning was all the signal the mist-hidden ninjas needed. In perfect unison, they flung kunai into the sky, peppering the air above with spinning blades. A barely audible hum answered them. Nathan's gaze flicked to the shuriken strapped to his back. His brow tightened. Then, as if swallowed by thin air, the intruder simply vanished. and in the very next instant materialized outside the barrier. Nathan's shout carried across the courtyard just as a seasoned Kirigakure shinobi, drawn by the commotion, sprang down from the rooftop of a neighboring building and landed atop the barrier. In an instant, the two men locked eyes. Nathan's irises flared like twin black suns, and for a moment, the mist shinobi froze, confusion etched on his face. He'd never seen a Mangekyo Sharingan before. That hesitation was all the opening Nathan needed. In a fluid motion, he wove his fingers into a seal and activated a Sharingan genjutsu. Even a split-second casting of the Mangekyo variant was enough to shatter his opponent's will. A metallic ring filled the air as Nathan drew his long sword. The blade glinted coldly in the moonlight, and with a single precise swing, he severed the ninja's head. Before the corpse even hit the ground, Nathan shaped his hands into another seal, channeled his chakra, and unleashed his next attack. Fire style, great fireball technique, Nathan roared. A colossal sphere of scorching flame erupted from his mouth and slammed into the head, instant, lie engulfing it in roaring inferno. When the flames died down, only smoldering embers remained where the fallen shinobi once stood. Even if the hidden mist village managed to seize him, extracting any information from Nathan's mind was now impossible. He sheathed his longsword, let the strain of his Mangekyo Sharingan fade, and cast a wary glance at the barrier spinning below. Then, channeling chakra into wind style, wind wings, he shot upward on a gust of cutting air. Nathan had known it was a trap from the start, and he had no intention of lingering to discover the full extent of his enemy's schemes. Better to put as much distance between himself and the hidden mist as possible. Chapter 403, Cultivation. What was that? Commander Ching stood inside Feiyutown's ceiling barrier, watching Nathan stride away with a puzzled frown. Just moments ago, his Byakugan's clairvoyance had pierced Nathan's water-release Kirigakure Jutsu cloak and revealed an unfamiliar aura flickering beneath. It was nothing like the Sharingan's energy signature. Terumi Mei, standing at Ching's side, glanced over at his tense expression. "Ching, this isn't your fault," she said gently. She'd assumed he was troubled by Nathan's escape. After all, as the mission leader, any failure fell squarely on his shoulders. She reached out, lightly touching his arm in a show of comfort. But Ching's mind wasn't on the operation's outcome. He hadn't confessed what he'd just seen. Words would achieve nothing. He needed proof. Once they returned to headquarters, he'd launch a thorough investigation into Nathan's true nature. Then he would know exactly what kind of power lay hidden beneath that misty jutsu. Little did he know that had been his last chance to hide the fact that Nathan had awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan. As he flew over the mist-shrouded forests of Kirigakure, Nathan replayed every moment of the past night. From the sudden ambush to his own swift countermeasures, it was clear the hidden mist village had laid this trap for him. Whether by design or coincidence, they'd forced him into a confrontation, and he'd handled it the only way he knew how. The water release, hidden mist technique may bewilder ordinary shinobi, but it cannot extinguish the Byakugan's all-seeing gaze. Nathan was certain that Kan Ching, the scout who had been tracking him, kept his Byakugan active throughout the skirmish. Only with that insight could Kan Ching have pinpointed Nathan's position so accurately in the swirling mists. And if Kan Ching's Byakugan was open, there was no way he wouldn't have noticed the sudden surge of chakra when Nathan switched on his Mangekyo Sharingan. The flow of that evolved eye is simply too distinct. Had he really activated his Byakugan right away? Nathan asked himself, recalling how he'd crept into Kirikure's territory 2 nights earlier to map out their reinforcements. Everything was clicking into place now, and the trap was far more dangerous than he'd first suspected. Nathan's shadow clone paused mid-practice, contemplating how to compensate for the Sharingan's poor long-range detection. Acquiring a Byakugan would solve that, and conveniently, the clone's current assignment was Nathan himself. Maybe it's time to make my move, it mused. Meanwhile, Nathan strolled back to the training ground, where the clone was still sparring against invisible opponents. He'd been here several times over the last few hours, but held off interrupting until the clone's cooldown period ended. He settled onto a nearby rock and lifted his shirt sleeve to inspect the scratch on his shoulder. Earlier, he'd yanked out the embedded shuriken, but now there was no sign of the injury. He hadn't performed any healing jutsu, he'd only focused a bit of chakra into the wound. Yet in 10 minutes flat, the gash had sealed as if it had never existed. Since his recent transformation boosted his body attribute to 19, his natural regeneration had skyrocketed. "Not bad at all," Nathan said, a pleased smile tugging at his lips. Without another word, Nathan lifted his hands, wove the seals in rapid succession, and unleashed the sage palm art. Potent, yang-natured chakra surged through him, reinforcing every muscle and bone with each pulse. 1, 2, 3. By the 15th use, his reserves were nearly spent, so he let the technique fade. Exactly what he wanted. Now was the perfect moment to train his shadow clone technique. Duplication jutsu devours massive amounts of chakra, so the trick was to practice when his own reserves were already low, stretching the 15,000 chakra points he'd set aside to their fullest. After the drain of the sage palm art and the strain of his earlier skirmish and flight, his chakra was just where he needed it. Small, but sufficient. Calmly, Nathan formed the Ren seal. "Kaji Bunshin no Jutsu," he intoned. In an instant, a thunderous burst of chakra smoke billowed out, coalescing into a perfect shadow clone standing beside him in the clearing. Nathan and his 10 shadow clones stood motionless, each one quietly centering its chakra. Over the next hour, Nathan repeatedly summoned and dispersed them, 20 full cycles of the shadow clone technique. Finally, he opened his skill panel and saw his mastery had risen by 20 points. He closed the interface without a flicker of emotion, checked his watch, exactly 60 minutes had passed, and dispelled all 10 clones at once. In an instant, the clones dissolved into 10 shimmering streams of chakra, each laced with their accumulated memories and training. Nathan closed his eyes and began to absorb them, carefully integrating every fragment of experience. 10 minutes later, he had fully converted those recollections into tangible improvements to his technique. Without missing a beat, Nathan performed the shadow clone technique again, spawning another 10 duplicates. Born with his newly elevated skill level, they each possessed peak understanding of the art. From here on, every drop of effort would build upon an already loftier foundation. Nathan called this his refreshed state. He waved his hand and sent 10 shadow clones off to train while he activated the reflection heart technique, channeling every ounce of chakra into evolving his Sharingan. Time slipped away almost unnoticed. 30 minutes melted into his effort, and soon his reserves dwindled. With barely enough chakra left, Nathan dispelled those clones and formed fresh ones, this time dedicating himself to perfecting the shadow clone technique itself. As each hour-long cycle closed, he recalled his duplicates and absorbed their experiences and memories in an instant. The process felt robotic, endlessly repetitive, but every time he glanced at his status panel, the skill meters inched higher. That steady progress made the tedium worthwhile, and he attacked the next round with even greater determination. Minute by minute, the night wore on. More than 2 hours passed before Nathan finally paused. The brilliant moon had faded on the horizon, and the first pale light of dawn was creeping across the sky. Yet as the new day broke, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. His hard work was beginning to pay off. Nathan paused a moment to integrate the final waves of cultivation energy and memories drawn from his 10 shadow clones. With a calm breath, he rose and unleashed the shadow clone technique. Gathering a vortex of wind beneath him, he formed wind style, wind wings, and soared alone toward the Blackstone stronghold. He couldn't delay. Submitting his mission report was urgent. His remaining 10 clones would continue their cultivation for another hour before dissipating naturally. At that point, Nathan would absorb the experiences and insights they'd gained within the stronghold. Once the report was filed and his knowledge bank enriched, he intended to devote himself entirely to mastering the Palm Immortal technique, followed by the Heart Reflection technique. Chapter 404, Success and Discovery. In the blink of an eye, 2 more days had passed. The incident that night stirred up no real fuss. Kirigakure never admitted to a botched operation, and Konoha quietly clung to the hope that Nathan would return soon, forcing the hidden mist to expend its strength once more. But Nathan himself had learned a hard lesson. Though the presence of the mysterious Heaven's Guard meant he could never truly be trapped, He now understood that Kirigakure was hunting him. Rushing in headlong would be reckless, not courageous. So when Sano Nobuhisa, commander of the Blackstone stronghold, dropped pointed hints about altering his approach, Nathan simply pretended not to notice. Sano couldn't compel him outright. No one in the village knew that Nathan had a celestial protector watching his back. To them, ordering him into more dangerous assignments was tantamount to sending him to his death. They might honor a shinobi's willingness to sacrifice for Konoha, but they refused to send any man to die in vain. Nathan knew better than anyone that even Commander Sano Nobuhisa wouldn't dare push too hard, nor could he, even if he wanted to. The Uchiha Council had made it clear, sacrificing one of their prodigies was out of the question. As a rising star of the Uchiha clan, Nathan's death would dishonor them all. After a few discreet inquiries, Sano Nobuhisa quietly dropped the idea. Nathan himself returned to his daily routine without complaint. Every dawn he would fly toward Feiyu Town to shadow the Mist Ninja, then slip back to Konoha with his gathered intelligence. Day after day, he watched the hidden Mist Village complete its final preparations, and Konoha's forces were doing the same. The tension between the two nations had reached its zenith. A war seemed inevitable, but Nathan found himself far more interested in honing his own skills than speculating about the coming conflict. That night, under a moonless sky, Nathan finished his last reconnaissance mission and made his way down to the rocky shoreline. He ran through a series of kata, each movement crisp and controlled. When he concluded his training, his breath steady and his muscles humming with energy, something shifted in the air. His eyes snapped open, sharp with awareness. He sensed a disturbance, a subtle ripple of chakra sweeping across the tide. It was nothing less than a clear sign that his vigilance would soon be tested. Nathan closed his eyes and drew in a slow, steady breath. Just moments ago, relying on everything he'd learned from his shadow clone training, he had succeeded in manifesting Earth attribute chakra. When he opened his palm, a faint, gritty glow pulsed between his fingers. To anyone else, it might have looked like nothing more than a wisp of energy. To Nathan, it was proof that he'd taken a major step forward on the path to mastering every chakra nature. He forced himself to calm the surge of excitement buzzing through his veins. With a subtle motion, the earthen chakra dissolved back into his body. This breakthrough was only the beginning. If he wanted to wield earth chakra with true skill, he still had to learn its form transformations and nature alterations, techniques that shape raw elemental power into jutsu. Without those refinements, any newly gained chakra attribute would be little more than a parlor trick. In the shinobi world, a few determined ninja could develop multiple chakra natures if they devoted enough time to it. But it was far rarer for them to master more than 2 or 3, because each additional attribute demanded its own complex set of molds and manipulations. That's why most jonin specialized narrowly. They refused to spread themselves too thin. Better to excel in a handful of elements than to dabble superficially in many. Nathan had no intention of following the conventional route. He wanted full freedom to adapt instantly to any combat scenario by flexing his chakra into water, fire, wind, lightning, or now earth. Yet he understood that raw talent without careful practice was wasted potential. Tonight's success felt exhilarating, but tomorrow he would return to the basics, perfecting the earth release mold until he could shape it blindly, at will, without a single wasted drop of chakra. A light wind rustled the leaves overhead. Nathan closed his fist, recalling the feeling of grit and solidity at his fingertips. This power, new and raw, was his to hone, and he would. One precise transformation at a time, he would build toward true mastery of the 5 elements. Nathan, however, was different. He didn't have to separately learn how to change his chakra nature and form. By pushing any given ninjutsu to a sufficiently high level, he automatically unlocked its corresponding elemental transformation, a complete reversal of the usual training order. Most shinobi must first master their chakra nature before they can advance a jutsu tied to it. Nathan simply perfected the jutsu and found the nature transformation followed on its own. In effect, it was a cheat, and he loved it. With a grin, Nathan brought to mind the exact requirements and procedures for 3 Earth-style techniques. Earth Release, Turbo Spear, Earth Release, Turbo Wall, and the Earth Release hardening technique. He folded his hands in the correct seals, invoked the shadow clone technique, and in one smooth motion created 12 perfect duplicates of himself. 9 clones resumed their previous drills, refining other skills, while the remaining 3 immediately began practicing specialized earth escape jutsu. Minute after minute ticked by, each clone pushing farther into the earth release mysteries as Nathan watched, ready to absorb their progress and deepen his own mastery. 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. When Nathan finally dispelled his shadow clones and absorbed their memories and battle data, a brand new entry glowed on his skill panel. Earth Style, Earth Spear, Level 0, 1/100. A broad grin spread across Nathan's face. He hadn't even fully mastered the technique yet, and his proficiency was still at 0, but seeing it officially recognized was a watershed moment. Once a skill appears on the panel, he knew he could simply pour in chakra to raise its level without running into hidden roadblocks. In other words, he was well and truly on the fast track, and that was more than enough to keep his spirits high. The only drawback was that his other 2 Earth-style jutsu, Earth Wall Encapsulation and Earth Hardening Technique, hadn't imprinted on the panel, despite the hours of chakra he'd invested. Nathan didn't mind too much. After all, Earth Spear was only a C-rank ninjutsu, while the other 2 were B-rank. It was only natural that they wouldn't register all at once. With at least one technique safely on the panel, he could turn his full attention to mastering it before tackling higher-rank skills. Nathan grounded himself in the fundamentals of Earth Style, Earth Spear, knowing that once this jutsu was fully mastered, the other 2 Earth-style techniques would soon follow. He took his time. After meditating on the spear's form and flow, he reformed his hand seals, activated the shadow clone technique, and split into 12 identical copies, each one drilling the same earth-based strike. Nearly an hour slipped by in silence. Dawn was breaking when one of the clones suddenly snapped Nathan back to awareness. Black specks had appeared on the sea's horizon. Instinctively, he opened his Sharingan and focused on the distant shapes. "A ship," he murmured. Without hesitation, he wove a few quick seals and invoked Wind Style, Wings of Wind. A pair of translucent, feathered wings sprouted from his back. Nathan lifted off, climbing swiftly to several hundred meters to stay out of the newcomer's line of sight. From that vantage point, the dark silhouettes on the water grew clearer and far more intriguing. Nathan's heart sank the moment he spotted them, a fleet of sleek warships cutting through the dawn mist. At first glance, they could have passed for merchant vessels, but the black sails and imposing hulls gave them away. These were Hidden Mistville, Laj warships. On every deck stood the unmistakable silhouettes of mist ninjas, the same elite soldiers who had defended Feiyu Town. "If that's the case," Nathan whispered, tightening his grip on the straps of his pouch, "they're planning a naval assault on the Blackstone stronghold." He didn't hesitate. Channeling chakra into his legs, Nathan propelled himself forward, skimming over the rocky shoreline toward the fortress walls. For centuries, Blackstone's defenses had been oriented seaward, bristling with cannons and ballistae aimed at any approaching fleet. But ever since Feiyu Town fell to the mist, the garrison had shifted its vigilance inland, expecting a landward invasion. The Hidden Mist Village was exploiting that blind spot. By sending their warships around the headland, they aimed to catch the fortress off guard and breach its sea-facing walls before the defenders could reorient their defenses. Nathan's breath came in ragged bursts as he closed the distance. Each bound brought the stone battlements into sharper focus, the watchtowers, the reinforced gates, the patrols pacing atop the ramparts. If he was too late, the first volley of cannon fire would tear through those walls, and the stronghold might crumble just as swiftly as Feiyu Town had. He raced on, determination blazing in his chest. Warning the Black Stone garrison was his only chance to turn the tide, and to keep the Hidden Mist's bold strategy from succeeding. There was no other explanation. Their timing was too precise. Judging by the speed of their ship, they'd set sail the very moment I wrapped up my reconnaissance mission and departed. I couldn't believe it was a coincidence. They'd clearly done their homework, figured out my usual schedule, and planned their move to coincide with my exit. What they hadn't counted on was my routine after every mission. I always spent some time training on this very reef beach. That oversight let me pinpoint their position immediately. So that's how it went down. For a moment, I wasn't sure whether to chalk it up to my own good fortune or their bad luck. Either way, I knew one thing for certain: I'd be the one taking the credit. Chapter 405, Respective Reactions. The cabin was deathly silent save for the soft hum of the warship's engines. Suddenly, Nathan's eyes snapped open, his features tightening into a scowl. Standing beside him, a Kirigakure Jonin glanced over with concern. "What is it, Nathan?" the Jonin asked, his voice low. Nathan's Byakugan had been scanning the surrounding 1-kilometer radius non-stop, exactly as ordered. As Kirigakure's sole Byakugan user, he'd been entrusted with nothing less than the success of this entire mission. But now his expression betrayed him. "I think our position has been compromised," Nathan replied, voice tense. The Jonin's heart skipped a beat. They'd spent weeks planning this operation in absolute secrecy, every detail locked down tighter than a fortress gate. News of an exposure shouldn't have been possible. "Explain," he demanded, though his calm facade had already cracked. Nathan pressed his palms lightly against his temples, focusing his vision once more. "I'm detecting chakra signatures converging on our location. Multiple sources, spread out but heading this way fast. Whoever they are, they know exactly where we are, and they're coming to intercept us." A chill ran down the Jonin's spine. He swallowed hard before nodding firmly. "Understood. Alert the rest of the crew. Prepare for engagement. This operation stays on track, no matter what." Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, steeling himself. Outside the cabin, the warship continued its steady advance toward enemy lines. Inside, an even more dangerous battle had just begun. Nathan shook his head. "I'm not sure. All I saw was Uchiha Seime's silhouette against the night sky. Beyond that, I don't know anything." "Uchiha Seime?" The Kirigakure Jonin at once moved to the cabin's lone window and peered into the darkness. Nathan raised a hand. "No need to look. He's already gone. Our priority is to inform the captain. What should we do next?" The Jonin blinked, startled back to his duty. "Maintain surveillance of the perimeter," he ordered, then hurried off to deliver the news. The cabin fell silent. Nathan pressed his shoulder against the rough wooden wall and exhaled slowly, his mind racing. After a moment, he murmured to himself, "That chakra flow, it wasn't the same as 2 days ago." A fresh surge of curiosity coursed through him. He reached into his ninja pouch and withdrew a sealed scroll. In one smooth motion, he traced the complex hand seals he'd practiced for years. With a sharp snap, the scroll's barrier broke, and before him floated several ancient tomes. Their cracked leather covers and brittle, yellowed pages spoke of secrets buried long ago. Nathan's heartbeat quickened. These books had been hidden for a reason. Now, at last, he might uncover the truth. Over the past 2 days, Nathan had assembled these books through various village channels. Nearly all of the records concerned the Uchiha clan. He picked one volume off the crate and he began to read. Soon the only sound in the cabin was the soft rustle of turning pages. Within minutes, Nathan was completely absorbed. As for the captain's verdict, he didn't give it a second thought. He already knew it. This operation was irreversible. The village had poured months of planning and resources into it. There was no way they'd call it off now. And this assault wasn't limited to their stronghold alone. 3 other outposts were set to strike between tonight and dawn. Even if their preparations were exposed, the offensive would still go ahead, and likely accelerate. Ao's hunch had been right. The moment the Kirigakure Jonin delivered the intel, their fleet picked up speed. They no longer cared about secrecy. All that mattered now was reaching the target zone and launching the attack as quickly as possible. No matter how fast the others were, they couldn't outrun Nathan. 15 minutes later, Nathan burst back into the black stone stronghold. He wasted no time and sprinted straight for the war room. With a thunderous bang, he flung the door open. The Jonin on duty leapt to their feet, hands instinctively going to their weapons. But when they saw Nathan's grim expression, they froze. "What's happened, Nathan?" one of them demanded. "Alert Captain Sano immediately," Nathan replied, his voice urgent. "The mist ninja from Feiyu Town are moving along the waterways, preparing to strike." A stunned silence swept the room. The Jonin stared at one another in disbelief, then back at Nathan, whose seriousness brooked no argument. Finally, one of them snapped to attention. "Right away. I'll inform the captain and summon the other jonin." Without waiting for further instructions, he raced from the chamber, leaving everyone else to steel themselves for the looming attack. Nathan watched as another officer spoke up. "I'll muster more troops. Our eastern defenses are too thin. We need reinforcements at once." With that, he strode out of the war room. His words prompted everyone to spring into action. Within minutes, the corridors of Blackstone Citadel echoed with the footsteps of rousing shinobi, leaving Nathan alone in the hushed chamber. He remained seated, knowing Commander Nobuhisa Sano would return for a briefing. Sure enough, only a few minutes passed before Sano burst through the doors, urgency etched on his face. "Nathan," he demanded, "what's the precise situation back in Kirigakure?" Nathan leaned forward and laid out every observation he'd made, no detail left out. As for his own speculations, he simply let them go unspoken. After all, if Commander Sano could gather facts like these, he could draw his own conclusions. After hearing the full report, Sano Nobuhisa nodded gravely. "So Kirigakure has been laying the groundwork for some time." He paused, then added, "Thank goodness we never let our guard down. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster." Nathan understood exactly what he meant. In the past few days, although the Feiyu town fortress fell, their Blackstone stronghold retreated its main defenses inland. Crucially, the eastern line, facing the sea, remained intact. If they could simply buy a little more time, Nobuhisa could marshal enough troops to hold that flank. And none of it would have been possible without Nathan's timely intelligence. Had he not returned with those details, Konoha might have been caught completely off guard, and the outcome could have been far worse. Now, with the clock still ticking, they finally had just enough time to fortify their positions. Nathan shivered at the thought of how many lives his report might have saved, and how much devastation it had averted. Captain Nobuhisa Sano's gaze on Nathan turned unreadable. Over the past 2 days, Nathan's act of feigned incompetence had tested Sano's patience. He deliberately withheld cooperation to bait the Mist Ninja from Feiyu Town. Yet in only 48 hours, Nathan had delivered astonishing results, leaving Sano quietly chagrined at underestimating him. "Captain?" Nathan prompted, breaking the silence. "Do you have any further instructions?" Sano blinked, shook off his surprise, and cleared his throat. "Nathan, don't worry about what's happening here. Your next orders are simple. Head back at once. Use our air superiority to shadow the Mist Ninja's movements and relay any intel to us immediately." Nathan nodded. "Understood. I'll coordinate with Aoi Yamanaka for real-time updates." Aoi Yamanaka, one of the base's elite operatives, belonged to the legendary Yamanaka clan. His mind-link techniques would ensure seamless communication, making him the ideal partner for Nathan's mission. Nathan had long since mastered the heart-to-heart technique. By leaving behind a shadow clone, he could converse with Sano Nobuhisa in real time, though it still required someone on the ground to keep watch. With plenty of hands already at the base, Nathan saw no reason to hog the spotlight. "Aoi Yamanaka," he said into the bond. On the other end, Sano Nobuhisa fell silent for a moment, weighing Nathan's advice. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Understood. You should depart immediately." "Right," Nathan replied. Without another word, he did the instant body technique, his form dissolving from the meeting room in an instant. Seconds later, he materialized outside, summoned the wind style, wind wings, and shot upward into the sky. Chapter 406, War Begins. Half an hour later, east of the Blackstone stronghold and just off the coastline, Nathan crouched behind a sandbag bunker with the rest of his squad. All along the beach, hundreds of Konoha shinobi had split into 3 detachments, their forms shadowed against the rising tide. They were arranged in a broad arc, each cluster hunkered down behind earthen fortifications, breath held, waiting. The only sounds were the lapping of waves against the shore and the soft, steady breathing of the hidden troops. Beyond them, further inland, a flurry of activity contrasted sharply with the tense stillness at the front. Mid- and lower-rank ninjas rushed back and forth between the stronghold and the beach, hauling crates of kunai, bundles of shuriken, and rows of smoke and exploding tags. Everything they might need for the coming fight had been stockpiled here, a testament to Konoha's careful preparation. Minutes dragged by, each one heavy with anticipation. Nathan's fingers tightened around the haft of his blade, knuckles whitening, as he listened to the faint rush of the surf. Then, without warning, a sentry's shout split the silence. Enemy ships off the bay, approaching fast. Heads snapped up, muskets were raised, kunai gripped and readied. Nathan pressed his back into the bunker's cool earth and peered toward the water, eyes narrowing. First, a lone vessel from Kirigakure, the Mist Village, slipped around a rocky promontory and into view. Its hull creaked as it cut through the swell. Then came another, and another. Within moments, over a dozen gray-hulled ships fanned out across the bay, their sails taut in the coastal breeze. A tense hush fell over the defenders. Nathan's heart pounded in his ears as he steadied his breathing. The moment they had trained for, the battle they had braced themselves to face, had finally arrived. He glanced at his comrades, saw the same determination in their eyes, and tightened his grip on his weapon. War at last was upon them. A Hyuga shinobi wasted no time activating his Byakugan, sweeping the decks of the approaching fleet to gauge how many warships the Hidden Mist had sent and how heavily they were manned. Within moments, he relayed his observations to Lord Sano Nobuhisa and the others. In the world of shinobi, intelligence is prized even more highly than in conventional warfare, yet raw power still reigns supreme. No matter how much you know about your enemy, if you lack the strength to stand and fight, that knowledge counts for little. As a result, ninja engagements often come down to brutal contests of attrition. Small teams of 2 or 3 match up against each other and clash until one side is too exhausted or wounded to continue. It may seem primitive, but this method lets each village press its greatest assets into service and accept defeat without complaint when it comes. 1,000 thoughts raced through Nathan's mind as he hovered on the wind currents high above the battlefield. He stared down at the unfolding skirmish with a calm intensity, calculating every possible outcome before committing to his next move. The Kirigakure warship crested the waves like a silent leviathan. At that moment, a squad of Konoha shinobi suddenly broke from the coastal defensive line and sprinted toward the surf. In unison, they wove hand seals and unleashed their jutsu, water-style, explosive wave. Although none of them could summon the vast reserves of someone like Hoshigaki Kisame, the combined force of more than a dozen practitioners was still formidable. A towering wall of water, easily 10 meters high, erupted from the sea and bore down on the Kirigakure vessel at frightening speed. If it struck full force, even a heavily armored warship would shatter into splinters. "Not on our watch," 3 Kirigakure shinobi called in unison. They leapt from the deck and landed nimbly on the churning surface. Forming seals of their own, they dropped to one knee, pressed their palms against the water, and chanted in low voices, "Ice release, ice sealing technique." At once, the rushing wall of water froze solid in a lattice of crystalline spikes, arresting its momentum just yards from the ship's prow. Those 3 were no ordinary fighters. They were members of the Snow Clan, each bearing the rare bloodline limit of ice release. As long as they held their seals, that frozen barricade would hold back Konoha's assault, at least for now. Above decks, Lieutenant Tagashi barked orders. "Ready the balliste. Target those Konoha shinobi before they regroup." Below, the Konoha squad steadied themselves on the frozen surface, chakra still humming within their veins. The next exchange was about to begin, and neither side would give an inch. As the Mist Shinobi completed their ninjutsu, a gleaming sheet of ice sprang to life in their palms. It spread outward like a living thing, racing across the surf until the crashing waves themselves were frozen solid, caught in midair as if sculpted by a divine hand. But the technique did not stop at the waterline. The ice continued advancing, engulfing the shoreline and extending deep onto the beach, creating a glassy runway of frost. Seizing the moment, scores of mist ninjas leapt from their ships onto the newly formed ice. Their movements were fluid and precise. They skated toward the coast under a hail of Konoha shurikens and elemental jutsu. Yet every attack shattered harmlessly against the buttressed ice walls, the frozen waves towering over 10 meters high, leaving the invaders unscathed. Within minutes, the mist forces swarmed the shore, their formation still intact, their momentum unbroken. High above the battlefield, Nathan rode the back of his summoned hawk, watching the scene unfold with a heavy heart. He recognized the signs of a meticulously planned assault, the flawless coordination, the sudden ice breach, the the lightning-fast landing party. Konoha's defenses, hastily mustered, had been mere child's play in comparison. Shaking his head, Nathan braced himself for the fight to come. The mist had struck first, and they had struck decisively. In the opening clash, Team Konoha found themselves on the back foot. Their initial attack had failed to break the enemy's lines, so the shinobi of Konoha immediately shifted gears, abandoning offense and falling back to their defensive positions. What happened next would depend entirely on both sides' reactions. As the hidden mist shinobi advanced over the shattered ice barrier, still rippling from the earlier wave jutsu, a sharp command rang out from their ranks. "Move up!" No sooner had the order been given than a deadly hail of kunai swept out from behind the mist's makeshift bunker. The projectiles whistled through the frigid air like rain, striking the feeding points of Konoha's defense. Taken by surprise, some Konoha ninjas ducked for cover. Others flung kunai in return, sparking a brief, tense exchange. But the mist shinobi were ready. A handful of them formed quick hand seals and dipped their hands into the water that pooled around the bunker's base. In unison, they unleashed water-style, water wave against the Konoha forces. In the hidden mist village, this jutsu is as basic and widespread for any water affinity shinobi as earth-style. Rock cannon is elsewhere. A dependable but unspectacular technique meant more to harass than to devastate. True to its reputation, the cascading wall of water soaked those behind Konoha's defenses, hampering their movements and forcing them to hunker down even further. Despite its lack of overwhelming force, the water wave had succeeded in buying the mist ninjas precious seconds and swinging momentum firmly back in their favor. None of the Konoha shinobi struck by that technique were hurt, yet the battle showed no signs of slowing. After the second wave of attacks, both sides closed the distance again. A number of warriors began wrapping their tools in explosive tags before launching them at opponents. Instantly, the battlefield's fury escalated. Many shinobi were caught off guard, unable to dodge in time, and fell to the ground wounded or worse. Agonized cries echoed across the field. Spurred by the chaos, both armies fought with renewed brutality. Daggers and kunai sliced through the air in rapid succession. Explosive tags detonated one after another, and each concussion roared like thunder. Fireballs streaked past, each scorching the air and raising the temperature with its searing heat. The combined force of the explosions and flames finally shattered the ice layer that the three Snow Clan Jonin had conjured on the sea's surface. The sudden collapse made footing slippery and disrupted the Mist Ninja's coordinated advance, but it was only a minor setback in the raging conflict. The Mist Ninjas leading the charge were all at least Chunin, each capable of walking on water, their momentum unbroken even as the ice shattered beneath them. In moments, they reached the shoreline, closing the gap to less than 10 meters. At that distance, explosive tags were worthless. The blast radius was too great. One wrong move, and you'd be as likely to wound a comrade as an enemy. All that remained was raw, close-quarters combat. Kill them! A Konoha Jonin's cry cut through the wind, and his fellow shinobi vaulted from their defensive positions. They crashed into the mist formation with blades drawn, igniting a brutal, desperate melee. Metal rang against metal, fists and feet found flesh, and the air filled with the shouts and grunts of warriors who had abandoned caution. In that chaos, neither side hesitated. Only the will to survive and the drive to protect their homeland fueled them as they fought, inch by bloody inch, across the snow-dusted beach. Chapter 407, Planning and Fighting. By mid-morning, the battlefield had become a maelstrom of steel and chakra. What began as a dawn skirmish had, in a matter of hours, escalated into full-scale war. Konoha's once formidable defense line lay in ruins, shattered beneath the unrelenting assault of hidden mist shinobi. The fight had spilled outward from the Blackstone stronghold's eastern ramparts, stretching over several kilometers, right out to where the sea lapped 1 to 2 kilometers beyond the shore. High on a jagged cliff overlooking the fray, Nathan watched the carnage below. Ninja from both sides darted among blood-soaked craters, some moving in tight formations, others operating alone, in sudden ambushes. The air rang with clashing kunai and the screams of the wounded. Every foot of ground was contested in a brutal, unceasing duel. Splattered crimson against stone and sand, the scene was more nightmare than war. a living testament to how far the Fourth Great Ninja War had spiraled beyond anyone's expectations. But this coastal inferno was only a fragment of the larger conflict. In Feiyu Town, Hidden Mist forces had already launched a devastating offensive, their sudden onslaught catching Konoha's defenders off guard. At the very same moment, the three other border fortresses that the Mist Village had seized in previous weeks erupted in rebellion. Coordinated simultaneously, these attacks threatened to collapse the entire defensive network surrounding Konoha. Nathan's heart pounded as he surveyed the battlefield. Word had circulated that reinforcements from the stone and sand villages were pushing toward the front, but whether they would arrive in time, or in sufficient numbers, remained uncertain. Every passing second seemed to tip the scales of fate one way or the other. He turned to his fellow shinobi. Weary eyes met his, determination unbroken. The time for planning had ended. Now, every jutsu, every strike, every sacrifice would decide whether Konoha's shattered line could hold, or if the Hidden Mist would finally crush the heart of the Leaf Village once and for all. With a deep breath, Nathan stepped off the cliff. The next battle had begun. For the moment, the north, central, and southern defense lines along Konoha's eastern border were all at high alert. Supplies and reinforcements were being rushed in non-stop to blunt Kirigakure's assault, but even with everything Konoha could muster, the outlook remained grim. The reason was simple. Konoha was already locked in a decisive struggle with Tsunagakure, and Iwagakure's forces were pressing hard elsewhere. After nearly a week of fighting, reserves were dangerously low. So when Kirigakure launched its sudden offensive, Konoha simply didn't have enough shinobi to mount a proper defense. Kirigakure seized the chance. Not only did they reinforce their four main strongholds to push deeper into Konoha territory, they also organized fresh detachments to probe other border outposts, forcing Konoha to spread its thinning ranks even more. Defending one's own land does simplify logistics. Supplies don't have to be shipped far, but it comes with a steep price. When every front is under threat, there aren't enough hands left to hold them all. Commander Nathan stood on the ridge overlooking the line of fortresses, each garrisoned to fend off the impending onslaught from the Hidden Mist Village. Despite knowing that the recent assaults on these outposts were little more than feints, meant to pin down his forces, he dared not weaken their defenses. If even one stronghold were left unmanned, rumors would spread through the Mist Village like wildfire, and they'd seize it in an instant, gaining a fresh foothold deep within his territory. Some strategists might have proposed an empty city gambit, abandon a few forts, lure the enemy in, then strike them in the flank. But Nathan dismissed the idea outright. Last season, the Mist Ninja had overrun 4 of their citadels with astonishing precision. Their intelligence network was so effective that even the Anbu operatives couldn't trace how critical information was being leaked. Leaving any position unguarded now would be nothing short of gambling with the entire defense. So Nathan resolved to meet them on equal terms, not with trickery, but with steel and numbers. If the Mist Village wanted a war of attrition, he would give them one, and he would ensure they paid dearly for every inch of ground they tried to claim. As long as Nathan refrains from any underhanded tricks, the Hidden Mist Village won't be able to uncover a single flaw in his clan's defenses. Such is the confidence of a people celebrated for their strategic brilliance. On raw numbers, it's true. The Mist forces near the 4 strongholds already outmatch them, and fresh ninja reinforcements are on the way. But when it comes to elite combat prowess, the Mist Village lags by an entire tier. Over the past week, Narachiguang has been anything but idle. In addition to deploying troops and stockpiling supplies, he spent countless hours coordinating with allied village elders, and they've agreed to send their finest warriors. If the defenders can hold the line a little longer, these masters will arrive to turn the tide. With that caliber of support, even if the strongholds themselves fall, they can bleed the Mist invaders dry. After all, this archipelago sits hundreds of miles from Hidden Mist territory. If the Allied Navy succeeds in blockading the sea lanes and cutting off enemy provisions, the Mist offensive will collapse once their supplies run out. Nathan barely registered Narakiku's broader strategy. Stall the fight long enough for reinforcements to pour in, then turned the tide against the hidden sand village. Politicking held little interest for him. Right now, he was simply playing bystander on the battlefield. Of course, with his reputation and power, no one could afford to ignore him. Before he could slip away, 2 hidden Miss Jonin and 3 special Ambu operatives had him boxed in. Clang! 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 Nathan drew his Nodachi in one smooth motion. His Sharingan, its 3 Magatama fully illuminated, pierced through the chaos as he readied himself. Every shift of muscle, every bead of sweat on his opponent's brows, he registered it all, anticipating their next moves. From his right, a kunai whistled in. Nathan pivoted on one foot, sweeping the Nodachi across the blade. Sparks flew as metal met metal, showering the clearing with molten shards that sizzled on the earth. The impact sent a tremor through his arms, but his grip never wavered. Against the chime of steel, Nathan felt a familiar clarity. This was exactly where he belonged. Whoosh! A soft whistle of air sparked behind Nathan's head. His senses snapped to attention as he jerked his chin to the left, and a razor-sharp shuriken whizzed past his earlobe, scoring a fine line of blood. He barely registered it. Channeling chakra into his bloodstream, he sealed the nick instantly with his body's natural healing power. No medical ninjutsu required. That scratch was merely a warning shot. The 2 mist ninjas who'd been dueling him sprang back, creating distance. Nathan squared his shoulders, ready to pursue, when the very air around him rippled with dozens of incoming projectiles, shuriken and kunai arcing toward his vital areas. Without hesitation, he activated his Sharingan. The 3 Magatamas in each crimson eye spun furiously as he tracked every thrown weapon. Then, in a blur of movement, his sword sliced through the air. Ding, ding, ding! Each swing severed another kunai or shuriken before it could close the gap. In seconds, all of the enemy's blades clattered harmlessly to the ground. Nathan exhaled in relief, only to have 2 mist ninjas who had slipped behind him suddenly spring into action. Water style, water dragon bullet technique, one of them cried. Water style, water fang bullet, the other shouted. Instantly, twin torrents of water chakra hurtled toward him, one crashing down from above, the other driving in from behind. Their timing was perfect. Nathan had just evaded the previous salvo, his old chakra reserves, spent, and the new flow not yet established. Even if he managed to dodge again, he would lose all initiative and be completely overwhelmed. Confident in their trap, the 2 attackers exchanged triumphant grins. But Nathan remained unshaken. His earlier, drawn-out skirmish with 5 adversaries had been a deliberate ruse. He'd kept them occupied to avoid drawing even more attention and to buy himself time to recover. Now that genuine danger loomed, he could no longer hold back. He straightened his stance, prepared to unleash his true strength. Nathan slid his sword back into its sheath and formed a hand seal. In the blink of an eye, he unleashed his jutsu. Water style, giant shark bullet technique. A massive, translucent shark coalesced from the surrounding water and hurtled toward the swirling vortex ahead. From the other side, a mist village shinobi countered with his own water assault. Hundreds of razor-sharp water fangs spiraling outward in a relentless barrage. On paper, it was an impressive technique. He condensed a rapid jet of water, spun it at incredible speed, and sent it screaming toward Nathan's shark. But against the giant shark bullet, it was utterly futile. Each water fang was swallowed whole, absorbed into the shark's form, and only served to amplify its size and power. As the monstrous shark surged forward, it grew larger with every gulp of water and chakra. Its yawning maw and rippling fin cast an oppressive shadow over the battlefield. Realizing he was outmatched, the Mist Shinobi abruptly canceled his jutsu and leapt aside to safety. Satisfied with the outcome, Nathan shifted his attention away from the defeated attack, preparing for whatever would come next. Nathan continued to fall back, narrowly evading the torrent of water as the water-style, water dragon bullet technique descended from above. With a thunderous crash, the massive water dragon slammed into the ground, sending up a towering plume of mist and dust. Chapter 408, Injury. Did it work? One of the hidden mist special jonin peered into the swirling smoke and dust. The 4 others fell silent, their gazes fixed on the spot where Nathan had last stood. By all logic, that was exactly where the water dragon had struck him. Even if he'd survived, he had to be badly hurt. Yet a tight knot of tension gripped each of them. This fight wasn't over. A sudden whoosh shattered the stillness. From the heart of the dust cloud, a razor-sharp blade of wind, nearly a meter long, lanced through the air, aimed squarely at the jonin who'd just spoken. It sought to slice him in two. "Watch out!" Another special jonin shout cut through the haze. The targeted shinobi reacted instantly, darting sideways. The wind blade tore a thin, jagged line into the earth where he'd been moments before, but he himself emerged unharmed. The remaining 3 mist shinobi tracked the blade's path and, without hesitation, flung their kunai into the thick dust. They were determined to finish their opponent before he could strike again, but Nathan was anything but finished. Ding! Ding! 3 sharp clangs rang out through the haze. The kunai the mist shinobi had thrown rebounded off something solid, spinning back to embed themselves in the earth. The 5 mist ninja fanned out, blades at the ready, eyes scanning the settling dust. When the smoke finally cleared, they spotted the source of their frustration. Nathan. He stood there, shirt and vest shredded by gravel, skin marred with shallow cuts that oozed blood. But none of his wounds looked serious. He must have narrowly avoided the full force of their water dragon jutsu. The mist ninja tensed, pupils contracting with renewed determination. Before they could strike again, Nathan seized the moment to show precisely why Konoha's shinobi should never be underestimated. Gathering a surge of chakra, he unleashed a sudden burst of green light. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. Instant sword technique. Not good. Morishita's eyes went wide, dread washing over him. Instinctively, he spun on his heel and thrust his kunai out to the side. There was a sharp clang as steel met steel. Ha! Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied grin. In their earlier skirmish, he'd already pegged Morishita as the weakest of the 5 mist ninjas. That's why his first move had been Wind Release, Wind Blade, and why he'd followed up with this lightning-quick sword strike. Yet here he was, thwarted twice in a row. Nathan nodded to himself. Of course, a ninja capable of rising to even special jonin status would be no pushover, far stronger than a run-of-the-mill chunin. With his blade, he could fell 90% of chunin in a single blow, but Morishita had proven surprisingly resilient. Shaking his head, Nathan tossed aside any further misgivings and prepared for his next move. Nathan slipped between the flying shuriken hurled by the 4 mist shinobi, his movements fluid and precise. In the blink of an eye, he unleashed his instant sword technique, vanishing from one side of Morishita's 7th and reappearing at the other. A glint of cold steel flashed as Nathan brought his long sword down in a deadly arc aimed straight for Morishita's neck. Sensing the lethal intent, Morishita crouched just in time to evade the strike. But Nathan didn't pause. With a deft twist of his wrist, the blade altered course mid-swing. Instead of a horizontal slash, it dove downward in a wind-charged bevel. Before the edge even touched flesh, Morishita felt a sharp sting. He glanced down to see his shoulder torn open, the chakra-infused wind having ripped through muscle and skin. Blood welled at the wound. Pain and terror surged through him, but he forced himself to react. Fingers weaving seals faster than ever before, Morishita invoked his most desperate jutsu, water release, substitution technique. With a soft pop, Nathan's blade struck air. Where Morishita once stood, only a rippling pool of water remained. Nathan didn't hesitate for even a heartbeat. He slipped the scroll back into his pa, TK, and his gaze locked onto 7th Morishita, who had just skidded to a stop not far away. Perfect, he thought. In the same instant, he raised his left hand and wove the seals with lightning speed. Fire style, great fireball technique, he intoned. A towering sphere of flame burst forth, hurtling through the air and slamming into Morishita's chest. Ah! She screamed, her body instantly engulfed in scorching fire. 7th! Cried a Kirigakure shinobi, rushing forward. As she formed her own seals, she unleashed a water-style jutsu to quench the inferno that raced across Morishita's armor. At the same moment, 3 other mist ninja darted in to press their attack. One of them drew a kunai etched with an explosive seal and flung it straight at Nathan. Nathan's eyes flicked as the 2 remaining shinobi formed seals in unison. One summoned a torrent of water release, the other crackled with lightning release. Together, they unleashed a combined jutsu aimed squarely at him. His Sharingan sprang to life. In that instant, he spotted the glint of an explosive tag affixed to the incoming kunai. Abandoning any thought of parrying, he sheathed his blade and rolled aside just in time. But the moment his feet hit the earth, the combined water lightning jutsu struck. A towering, electrically charged column of water erupted where he'd been standing. With no choice left, Nathan activated his body flicker technique, vanishing in a blur and reappearing several meters away. He'd already lost precious seconds chasing down Morishita the Seventh, though. While he'd narrowly avoided the kunai, he couldn't outrun the jutsu itself. The water column slammed into the ground, instantly flattening into a thin, razor-sharp film that radiated outward at breakneck speed. Even Nathan's lightning-fast flicker couldn't stay ahead of its advance. Nathan spotted dark, glistening patches of moisture spreading beneath his feet and muttered, "Not good." He readied himself to leap clear of the slick surface, but it was too late. The instant his shoe touched the wet ground, a crackling bolt of lightning followed the water's path. Electricity hissed around him, and Nathan's legs went numb. He froze in place, helpless. From the shadows, the mist-hidden shinobi, who'd thrown the kunai before, caught his breath and recognized a golden opportunity. With hungry eyes, he plunged his hand into his pouch, drew 3 razor-sharp shuriken, and flung them at Nathan. Swish, swish, swish. The 3 steel stars streaked through the air, aiming straight for Nathan's throat, chest, and abdomen. In a heartbeat, his Sharingan flared to life, locking onto each projectile. Confirming there were no hidden seals or traps etched on their blades, he dispensed with any flashy jutsu. Instead, he shifted his weight and twisted his torso just enough to let the first shuriken zip past, narrowly missing his throat. The first shuriken aimed at Nathan's heart didn't pierce him. It merely scraped across his left arm, carving a jagged scar before spinning off into the night. The second knife thudded into his lower abdomen, painful, but mercifully missing every vital organ. Still, lingering here meant being a sitting duck for more attacks. "I have to get out of here now," Nathan decided. Teeth clenched against the burning pain, he lifted his hand, wove the seal, and called upon his chakra. With a rush of air that set the trees trembling, he unleashed his ninjutsu. Wind style, wind wings. In an instant, 2 translucent feather-like currents sprouted behind him, carrying him away from danger before anyone else could strike again. Chapter 409, Uninvited Guests. Whoosh! A pair of pale cyan chakra wings blossomed from Nathan's back. With a single thought, he guided them upward, propelling himself skyward. The 2 Kirigakure Jonin, who had been channeling a powerful ninjutsu, immediately broke off their technique the instant they realized he was slipping beyond their effective range. Without hesitation, each Jonin drew several shuriken from their pouches and flung them at Nathan. The throwing stars cut through the air at razor-sharp angles, designed to box him in with no room to maneuver. But Nathan didn't plan to dodge. Before the blades could close distance, he calculated their trajectories in mid-flight. With a ringing clang, he drew his long sword from its scabbard. In a fluid arc of steel, he met each shuriken in turn, ding ding ding, as the spinning blades were neatly bisected and sent clattering to the ground. The 2 Kirigakure Jonin exchanged a glance. Though they felt a twinge of regret that their surprise barrage had been so thoroughly deflected, neither of them showed any real disappointment. Nathan's incredible swordsmanship, combined with the power of his 3 Magatama Sharingan, should have made him untouchable. Yet the attackers had flung a handful of shuriken, blessed or poisoned in some way, to slow him down. They hadn't counted on killing him. Their sole aim was to hamper his speed and buy time for their comrades. Just then, 2 voices rang out in unison, "Nozomi!" Before the echoes even faded, a soft, melodious tone drifted toward Nathan, like a lullaby or a dream mumble. It slipped past his defenses and burrowed straight into his mind, whispering the irresistible urge to surrender to sleep. Hypnosis? Illusion? Nathan's pupils constricted as he summoned a wave of spiritual energy. Every strand of invasive chakra and mental trickery dissolved beneath his will. A low hum escaped him, an affirmation of his control. Below, the dreamlike veil shattered. Kimura Nozomi, pinned at Morishita Seven's feet, let out a muffled groan as clarity returned to her eyes. Nathan realized at once that the attack he just endured was nothing but an illusion, cast by the mist ninja who'd rushed ahead to rescue Morishita 7. Until now, he'd assumed she'd acted out of genuine concern for her comrades. But this sudden phantom strike spoke a different truth. She was probing for weaknesses, mapping his defenses under the guise of aid. It wasn't paranoia. In all their previous skirmishes, she'd never once revealed any illusory techniques. Yet the flawless timing and subtle complexity of this sonic illusion betrayed her true skill. Why, then, had she waited so long to deploy it? There was only one answer. She'd been hiding her full strength, lying in wait for the perfect moment to land a fatal blow. Her gambit might have been clever, but it was no match for Nathan's mental fortitude. Though she unleashed her most potent auditory mirage, it shattered almost instantly against the wall of his overwhelming willpower. Nathan hadn't yet learned the Sharingan's signature genjutsu, the magical mirror, heaven and earth spin, but with his current ocular power, he knew he could shatter lesser illusions. Thoughts racing, he cast his gaze to the ground below. At that moment, the three mist ninjas began raising their hands into seals, but it was already too late. In a flash of chakra, Nathan tore free from the illusion's grip and rocketed into the sky, instantly moving out of their attack range. Watching him ascend, Zhengjin Runyi froze mid-seal, eyes wide. "How is that possible?" he whispered. Nathan's lightning-fast escape had completely unraveled their plan. Junichi, scowling in frustration, turned to Nozomi as if demanding an explanation. They had targeted Uchiha before, and even with the three Tomoe Sharingan, dispelling a phantom sound genjutsu normally took several seconds. How then had Nathan broken free so effortlessly? Nathan's brief window of vulnerability was enough for them to seize control, so why was he free again already? Every one of their schemes had failed, and Masui Junichi's anger flared. If Nozomi hadn't warned him in time, he would have believed Nathan had betrayed them. Under Junichi's accusing stare, Nozomi hurried to explain. His mental chakra is on another level, far beyond what even a seasoned Uchiha Jonin can contend with. I can't override him. Junichi's face darkened. He turned to look at Nathan, towering above them, and his expression grew uglier by the second. Their assignment was clear. Trap Nathan and prevent his interference. But Nathan was now completely out of reach. If he didn't want to be ensnared, there was simply no way they could hold him. Their mission was on the brink of collapse. "Damn it," Masui Junichi hissed under his breath. In one swift motion, he drew a kunai and flung it straight at Nathan. Yet from this distance, a lower position to Nathan's height, the kunai slowed almost to a halt. There was no way it could reach its target. Nathan barely flapped his wings as the shuriken whistled past, evading the strike by mere inches. He didn't rush into a counterattack, though. Instead, he ascended another 10 meters, putting distance between himself and the four mist ninjas below. Once he'd secured a safe perch in midair, he drew in a steady breath, formed a hand seal, and unleashed his ninjutsu, palm senjutsu. A concentrated sphere of yang-released chakra blossomed in his palm. With a swift motion, he drove it into the gash in his abdomen. The shuriken hadn't been fatal, but the wound was deep, and he'd lost more blood than he liked to admit. He needed to stop the bleeding, and fast. Turning his attention briefly to the cut on his left arm, Nathan released a trickle of chakra, stimulating his body's natural healing. It wasn't a dramatic cure, but it would mend itself well enough without further intervention. Satisfied that he'd stabilized both injuries, he refocused on the enemy below. The mist ninjas hovered in a loose formation, waiting for him to make the next move. Nathan flexed his wings and braced himself for a formal counterattack, only to catch sight of something unexpected on the horizon. He craned his neck southward, toward the Blackstone stronghold. A few kilometers out, a force of 200 to 300 figures was advancing rapidly, kicking up dust as they marched. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. Reinforcements, or an entirely new threat? Either way, this battle was about to get a lot more complicated. Nathan didn't pause to question his instincts. He abandoned his assault on the mist ninjas below and instead spread his wings, veering toward the lone figure on the horizon. At 40 meters per second, he covered the distance in under 2 minutes and hovered above the moving formation. The answer came instantly. Mist ninjas. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he studied their banner and uniform. He'd already guessed their identity the moment he saw them approaching from the south. Only Feiyu Town's mist operatives would risk attacking the Blackstone base from that direction. Konoha's reinforcements, by contrast, would come from the west or north, closer to the heart of the fire country. Why they chose this moment to strike, though, remained a mystery. He tucked his thoughts away for later. For now, the priority was clear. He had to warn the base at once. With that, Nathan banked sharply and shot back toward headquarters, every second counting. Chapter 410, Harassment. Nathan didn't hesitate. Resolute, he raised his hand, formed the familiar seal, and activated the mind link technique. Normally, he'd be wary of exposing such a private skill, but now was no time for caution. At his current speed, he could be back at the base in under 2 minutes, but the Mist Ninja Squad was already positioned close to the fortress. In a fight that tight, even a 2-minute window could change everything. After a heartbeat's thought, he decided to broadcast his telepathy in full. His psychic technique had just reached level 3 after 2 days of relentless practice. Within a 5-kilometer radius, shadow clone aside, he could now communicate mentally at will. Without that upgrade, this move would have been impossible. Focusing his energy, he reached out to Sano Nobuhisa. "Nathan," came the hesitant reply. On the other end, Sano Nobuhisa's surprise was palpable. Clearly, he hadn't expected Nathan to master the Mountain Clan's secret arts so quickly. Nathan didn't offer any further explanation. He simply reported, "A squad of mist ninjas is advancing from the south, about 260 strong." He glanced back at their formation below, giving it a quick tally. Sano Nobuhisa let go of any questions about Nathan's sudden mastery of mind knowledge. "What's their breakdown? And how far out are they exactly?" Nathan studied the approaching forces. 10 Jonin, 170 Chunin, and the rest are Jinin. They're roughly 4 kilometers from the stronghold. 4 kilometers. Sano muttered, weighing his options for a heartbeat. Then he straightened, issuing the order without hesitation. "Nathan, stall them for as long as you can. I'll dispatch reinforcements right away." "Yes, sir." Nathan had known this would happen. If he didn't return to the stronghold himself, his sole mission now was to delay the enemy's assault. Nathan hovered high above the battlefield, weighing his options. He could return to the stronghold, relay fresh intelligence, then immediately be dispatched again to stem the enemy's advance. After all, with his mastery of flight, no one was better suited for the task. He'd already sent his initial report. The Fog Ninja numbers were not as overwhelming as rumored, and remained well within his capabilities. So he refused the recall without hesitation and shut off communication, refocusing entirely on the swirling mass below. Moments later, the Fog Ninja became aware of him. Their weapons, shurikens, kunai, and deadly mist blades, whistled through the air, but Nathan floated far above their reach. None of their projectiles could even graze him. From his aerial vantage point, he watched the Kirigakure Jonin squad advancing through the haze. Their momentum had slowed to a crawl. Each step was cautious, eyes darting upward. A small knot of Jonin clustered together, heads bent in discussion. Though their words were lost to the wind, their intent was unmistakable. They were plotting how to neutralize him. Some drew hand seals, others readied chakra blades, and tension crackled in the mist. Yet Nathan felt no unease. He flexed his wings of chakra, a confident smile tugging at his lips. Let them scheme. He was ready for whatever they had in store. Nathan hovered high above the ground, safe from any arrows or shuriken the Kirigakure shinobi might launch. Yet that safety was also his weakness. Relying on flying ninjutsu alone left him unable to threaten them. To his surprise, after only a brief exchange, the Jonin simply ignored his presence and pressed their squad onward, picking up speed as they went. He frowned. They'd laid down a clear challenge. From this height, no one could touch him, but neither could he affect them with the few jutsu he'd mastered. His aerial vantage rendered his warnings meaningless. If he dared to descend, however, dozens of foes would swarm him at once, and the danger he'd face would multiply. Nathan realized he needed a new plan. After shadowing his quarry for several hundred meters, Nathan let out a low sigh. "It's inevitable," he muttered. "Might as well get this over with." With that, he locked eyes on the thickest cluster of mist ninjas, flexed the chakra wings unfurling from his back, and dove like a cannonball. As he expected, the Kirigakure Jonin guarding the group shouted for his squad to halt and ready their weapons. The distance between them shrank in an instant, and Nathan felt himself slipping into their strike zone. At the last possible moment, he yanked up hard, drawing a perfect U-shaped arc against the sky. He wasn't looking for a direct clash. Rather, he wanted to seize the initiative, peppering them with feints and tricks, keeping them off balance. As long as he could slow their advance, actual combat could wait. Nathan streaked out of range in a blur, leaving the mist ninjas clutching handfuls of kunai in frustration. A few of them hurled their blades after him, but Nathan's speed and maneuverability were flawless. None of the weapons even came close. Rather than immediately diving again, he climbed back into the sky and hovered, silently studying the nervous group below. Down on the ground, the shinobi exchanged uneasy glances. After a tense moment, they began to advance. Just as they closed in, Nathan tilted forward in another feint, dropping sharply as if to strike. Instantly, the mist ninjas braced themselves, but before they could react, he flicked his legs and shot upward, narrowly avoiding the critical strike zone. Hovering once more at a safe height, Nathan repeated the maneuver, a dive, a pause, then a swift ascent. Below, confusion rippled through the ranks. Claudio, one of the jonin, cursed under his breath while the others scrambled to reform a defensive line. Nathan activated his Sharingan, eyes glowing crimson as he watched their disarray. A satisfied grin tugged at his lips. His plan was working perfectly. Then, in the midst of their chaos, something unexpected happened. The mist ninjas, rather than scattering, huddled together, their earlier fear replaced by a grim determination. Nathan's brow lifted. They weren't broken. They were regrouping. And that only made the game more interesting. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but in under a minute the squad broke in two. Half the mist ninjas veered off to the east, the other half to the west, each group taking off at a sprint. "What are they up to?" I muttered to myself. At first I was baffled, but then it clicked. After clearing roughly 100 meters, both groups halted, pivoted, and resumed their run toward the black stone stronghold. They'd split up to share the risk. No matter which team I targeted, the other would press on. That way, at least half of them would reach the stronghold unscathed. And because the two squads remained close enough to support each other, if one group got pinned down, the other could rush to their aid, or, if one fell, decide whether to press forward or help. Their plan was flawless and fast. To devise such a strategy on the fly impressed even me. Even the cleverest plan is worthless against overwhelming strength. Nathan murmured under his breath, unfurling the wings that had sprouted on his back, then dove straight toward the eastern team. Chapter 411, The Blockade. "Everyone, stay sharp!" The jonin of the Kirigakure squad barked orders to his men on the eastern flank. Below him, Nathan hurtled straight toward their formation, his silhouette a blur against the fading light. At their leader's command, the Kirigakure ninjas froze, eyes narrowing, kunai leveled and ready. Unfazed by the sudden ambush, Nathan pressed onward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. "Release!" the jonin shouted. In perfect unison, the shinobi split into 3 firing lines and launched their kunai at Nathan like a cloud of falling rain. Instantly, Nathan's Sharingan awakened. His world slowed as the Tomoe spun in his irises, sharpening every sense. He tracked each projectile's arc with surgical precision. Then, bursting from his back in a flash of crimson chakra, twin wings unfurled. With a graceful twist of his body, Nathan flowed through the first wave of blades as if drifting among blossoms, his robes untouched. But the enemy regrouped faster than he expected. As the second volley rained down, this time with deadly accuracy, Nathan had no choice but to pour more chakra into his movements. Each dodge, each flip, demanded every ounce of his skill. The air crackled with tension as he fought through the blockade, determined not to falter. Nathan had weathered the first 2 volleys of kunai without breaking a sweat, but the third wave proved far deadlier. The Mist Ninja Squad had taken extra time to prepare, launching more blades with pinpoint accuracy, and each kunai was now rigged with a burning detonation tag. Noticing the tally of explosive fuses trailing from the knives, Nathan didn't hesitate. He whipped around, drawing a sharp V through the air, and put distance between himself and the oncoming projectiles. Straining against gravity, the kunai arcs toward him, but with his sudden maneuver, none could keep pace. Boom, 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 the tags detonated midair, each blast birthing towering fireballs that warped the surrounding air. Heat waves radiated outward, but Nathan twisted aside, carving a graceful arc and then plummeting back toward the mist ninjas from a fresh angle. "Keep attacking," one of them shouted. At that command, the squad unleashed a coordinated three-stage assault, just as they had before, determined to overwhelm him this time. Nathan leaned out from his rocky perch and surveyed the 4 stages of his plan. Stage 1. A barrage of kunai rained up at him as the mist ninjas below opened fire. He barely registered each projectile, his focus on the next move. Stage 2. A handful of shinobi broke formation, forming hand seals to unleash shadowy ninjutsu. Unluckily for them, Nathan enjoyed absolute geographical advantage. He saw every flick of their fingers. Before the jutsu could manifest, he slipped silently down the cliff face, beyond their effective range. Their seals unraveled into wasted effort. Stage 3. From the west, a fresh squad of mist ninjas appeared. Having scouted his position and confirmed their allies' failure, they charged in at full tilt. Hidden from view, Nathan watched them converge, biding his time. Then he began his feint. 5 successive attacks, each one a daring leap toward the group below. Every time, they panicked and threw more kunai, only to find another empty ledge. Stage 4. With their ammunition dwindling and their confidence rising, the western squad closed to within a few hundred meters. That was Nathan's cue. Holding his breath, he tightened his grip on the cliff's edge, then launched a genuine assault, no tricks this time. He dove headlong into their midst, his figure blurring as he raced toward the unsuspecting shinobi. Below, they finally froze in unison, realizing too late that the real strike had finally begun. Nathan seized the moment, born from his enemy's hesitation. After narrowly evading the first volley of kunai, he sprang into action without a second thought. From his ninja pouch, he drew several kunai outfitted with explosive tags and sent them hurtling toward the unsuspecting genin below. Dropping his lofty vantage point only made the weapons fly faster and straighter, rendering interception nearly impossible. The genin had no chance to react, and even the nearby chunin were caught off guard by the sudden strike. It took a handful of jonin to bat down the incoming blades, but though they managed to halt the kunai, the explosive tags detonated on contact. A series of thunderous booms shattered the air as searing shockwaves rolled outward, scorching the battlefield and robbing everyone of their breath. In an instant, the once tight formation shattered under the assault. Nathan's eyes sparkled at the sight. Without a moment's hesitation, he beat his wings and launched into the air in a wide arc, drawing the 3 mist ninjas into his attack range. "Fire style, great fireball jutsu," he called. Hands weaving seals in a precise rhythm, Nathan poured chakra into his lungs. With a roar, he expelled a blazing orb over 10 meters wide. The fireball streaked toward the ground like a meteor, its heat already scorching the air. "Water style, water dragon bullet jutsu." The 3 mist ninjas responded in unison. They formed their seals and thrust their hands forward. Instantly, 3 colossal serpents of water coalesced beneath them, twisting skyward. The dragons lunged at the flaming sphere, jaws snapping together in midair. As fire met water, a thunderous sizzle rang out, and clouds of steam billowed up, shrouding the battlefield in thick white mist. Visibility dropped to near zero, leaving both attacker and defenders lost in the veil of vapor. The mist-hidden ninjas exchanged satisfied glances. The thick shroud of vapor made this battlefield ideal for them. They could strike unseen, vanish, and strike again. Just as they began to gather in small squads to devise their next move, an unexpected gale tore through the mist. "What? This isn't good," one of them hissed, eyes widening as the swirling air picked up speed. Instantly, memories of Nathan's wind-style techniques flashed through their minds. "Everyone, guard yourselves," a voice shouted, but the warning barely left his throat before the gale bore down. In an instant, it ripped away the surrounding mist, then slammed into the group with the force of a battering ram. Ninjas cried out as they were unbalanced and sent sprawling boots skidding across the muddy ground. When the wind finally died, the entire formation was in ruins. "Damn it," a mist ninja spat, struggling to push himself upright. But before he could regroup, a chill of impending danger washed over him. Without conscious thought, he flung himself face down, palms and forehead pressed into the earth in a desperate bid for cover. A subtle, metallic tearing split the air. Heart pounding, He dared to twist his head and look back, and froze. Where he had been standing, the earth had cracked open in a long, jagged line. The edges of the fissure were unnaturally smooth, like the blade of a giant knife. Silence fell over the shattered formation as they realized the true power Nathan possessed and how swiftly he could strike. Something had split the ground in two. Nathan's heart thundered in his chest. He knew that if he'd been even a fraction of a second slower, he would have been torn apart along with the earth itself. A cold wave of fear washed over him. Chapter 412, All-Out Assault. Huh? Nathan let out a quiet sigh as he watched his wind blade vanish past his target. He'd timed it perfectly, at least that's what he thought, yet the mist shinobi had somehow dodged it. It shouldn't have been possible, but ninjas don't play by the rules of common sense. They live to defy expectations, to turn the impossible into routine. In this case, the evasion didn't bother him. He hadn't intended to kill that particular opponent anyway. What mattered was that no one else on the enemy side should replicate the feat. Steeling himself, Nathan shifted his focus to another Kirigakure Chunin. He formed the familiar seal, gathered his chakra, and unleashed Wind-style, Windblade. Over countless drills and battles, he had honed this jutsu to deadly perfection. The swirling blade of air flew with razor-sharp speed and uncanny stealth. By the time the Chunin noticed the incoming attack, it was already too late. Swish! A sharp crack split the air as the wind blade cut through flesh and bone, slicing the shinobi cleanly in two at the waist. His agonized screams ripped across the battlefield. The surrounding Kirigakure ninjas recoiled in horror, their blood running cold. Instantly, they snapped to full alert, bracing themselves for whatever Nathan would do next. Nathan paid no heed to their stunned reactions. The instant his first wind blade sliced through the air, he unleashed a second, without so much as a pause. This time his target was a Kirigakure genin. Though the young shinobi spotted the attack at the last moment and spun aside, Nathan's razor-sharp wind blade still caught him, shearing off his right leg. Such a grievous wound rendered the genin helpless. He would need to be carried from the field. With one down inside their formation and another already horsed to combat, Kirigakure had already lost 2 fighters before the real struggle had even begun. "Damn it! Fight back!" roared a jonin on the ground below. At his command, the mist shinobi sprang into action. Kunai and shuriken arced through the air, while others wove hand seals to unleash ninjutsu and illusions. Every attack, however, fell short. Nathan had mastered the art of flight, floating nimbus technique, and now he drifted above them like a fish in water, twisting and dodging with inhuman grace. No blade, no projectile, no jutsu could pin him down. Seizing the advantage, Nathan channeled chakra into his hands and fired off streaks of wind-shredding shuriken, cutting down several more mist ninjas in rapid succession. Though only a handful of casualties among over 100 enemies might seem insignificant, the impact on their morale was explosive. The once confident squadron now faltered, hesitating to press their attack as Nathan hovered effortlessly above them. Imagine how maddening it is to face an opponent who can strike at will while you're forbidden to fight back. That's exactly the despair Nathan leaves in his wake. But thankfully, his assault doesn't last. In a dazzling storm of shuriken and smoke bombs, he tears the mist ninja formation to pieces, then slips away on silent wings. "He's gone," someone cries out, and a wave of relief sweeps through the remaining warriors. They'd all been terrified of Nathan, itching for him to vanish, and now he has. Their cheers fill the clearing. But not everyone is celebrating. The elite mist-hidden ninja squad wears grim expressions. Nathan fled in the same direction as another team. They need no further clue to understand his objective. Exchanging resolute nods, they swiftly reform their ranks and give chase. This mission came straight from the captain. There's no question of failure. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Mist Ninja Squad had just cleared 2 or 3 kilometers and was closing in on the Blackstone stronghold when Nathan descended into their path. "Watch out!" one of the sensor ninjas shouted the moment he picked up Nathan's chakra signature. Simultaneously, he hurled a kunai upwards, aiming directly for Nathan's unexpected flight altitude. In theory, the blade could have struck him, but in practice, it was a fool's hope. With a light flick of the feathery wings sprouting from his back, Nathan veered aside and and let the kunai whistle past harmlessly. Without hesitation, he pressed his palm forward, forming the seals for a powerful sealing jutsu. Then, drawing on his ample chakra, he unleashed. Wind release, great breakthrough. A ferocious gust exploded from his mouth, driving the surrounding air into a towering, spiraling tornado. The cyclone roared toward the cluster of mist ninja, shredding their formation and sending them sprawling before they could mount any counterattack. Even the Mist Village's finest defensive jutsu couldn't halt Nathan's onslaught. There simply wasn't time to react. "Scatter," their leader barked, and the squad fanned out, trying to blunt the force of Nathan's wind-release assault. Unlike the last unit, this group had been forewarned. They broke formation but maintained a loose, overlapping perimeter that made his next move a little more challenging. Only a little, though. 100 or so shinobi, no matter how well trained, were hardly an obstacle when he decided to go all out. With a silent roar, Nathan sprinted forward. Chakra wings sprouted from his back, propelling him at blurring speed straight into the enemy ranks. "Open fire! Now!" one of the mist ninjas shouted. A lethal storm of kunai and shuriken filled the air. Instantly, Nathan activated his 3 Magatama Sharingan, the crimson swirl in his eyes sharpening every movement. Where there was room, he weaved between the flying blades. Where there wasn't, he flexed his chakra wings to deflect them like shimmering shields. Not a single projectile found its mark. Nathan twisted through the air, evading incoming kunai by sheer reflex. Whenever one slipped past his defense, he braced it with the blade in his hand. Explosive tags strapped to enemy tools thundered all around him, but he countered each threat by flinging shuriken, sending them spiraling into the sky before they could detonate. Boom, boom, boom. Each blast sent roiling fireballs into the atmosphere. Nathan fought to withstand the searing heat, weaving through shockwaves with razor-sharp precision. He even tapped into the aftershock's force, using it to propel himself ever quicker toward the enemy ranks. In the space of a heartbeat, he closed the distance. Hand seals flew into place in an instant. "Fire style, Phoenix fire technique," he called, unleashing a volley of blazing orbs that carved arcs through the air. The fireballs scattered across the group of mist ninjas, most harmlessly whizzing past, but a few striking those who couldn't dodge in time. Nathan allowed himself a brief nod of satisfaction. He never intended to kill. His true aim was to scatter their formation, sowing chaos in their ranks. With that objective achieved, he readied himself for whatever came next. Nathan watched intently as the enemy below scattered in disarray under the relentless barrage of fireballs. Seizing the moment, he activated his wind style, wind wings. In an instant, he leapt into the air, carving a graceful arc as he descended toward a cluster of unsuspecting mist ninjas. With their formation broken and no one left to coordinate a defense, they stood exposed. Hands weaving through precise seals, Nathan unleashed his next technique, wind style, wind blade, aiming not mere to wound, but to kill. Each slicing gust drove his opponents further into panic, and in that chaos, Nathan knew he'd find both safety and opportunity, turning their fear to his advantage. Chapter 413, Support. A roaring gale sliced through the air, a wind blade over 10 meters long, crackling with barely contained force. Below, a handful of mist-hidden ninjas scattered in panic. Some hastily formed seals, desperate to counter with ninjutsu. Others turned tail and fled. But it was all in vain. The blade traveled too fast. Neither sealing hand signs nor frantic dodges could halt its advance. With a sickening sizzle, the wind blade cut through the frontmost ninja, bisecting him cleanly. His entrails spilled onto the ground in a gruesome spray. Still swirling with momentum, the blade clipped another's arm at the shoulder and severed half of a second target's torso, leaving a deep, ragged wound. Only 2 of the 5 ninjas remained standing, gasping, horrified, their combat effectiveness obliterated. Nathan hovered above the carnage, eyes cold and unflinching. He spared the 2 survivors a brief glance, then without hesitation launched himself skyward. With a swift, 90-degree turn, he streaked toward the rest of the mist-hidden forces, poised to unleash his next attack. Nathan strode into the clearing, his eyes narrowing as the cluster of mist ninjas scattered at his approach. In their panic, they flung kunai at him, hoping the shurikens and daggers would drive him off. But Nathan didn't flinch. He simply twisted aside, letting each weapon whiz past harmlessly. Before they could recover, he began the hand seals for his most formidable fire jutsu, fire style, dragon flame technique. As he advanced, Nathan inhaled deeply and unleashed a torrent of flame. In an instant, the blaze coalesced into a sinuous dragon of fire, roaring through the air toward the two miscreants who remained in his path. Of all the fire techniques Nathan had mastered, Dragon Flame was the quickest and most devastating. The lead ninja barely managed to dodge its full force. Only his forearm caught alight, the flesh sizzling beneath his jacket. The second man was far less fortunate. The fiery dragon tore into his flank, engulfing half his body in searing heat. With a final, wrenching scream, he collapsed, engulfed in flames. Nathan watched impassively as the scream died on the wind. The clearing fell silent once more, save for the crackle of dying embers where the mist ninja's body lay smoldering. Several Kirigakure shinobi felt a chill at the thunderous roar of his technique, but Nathan remained unmoved. After unleashing one rapid assault, he molded his hands into a seal and called out, "Fire style, Phoenix fire technique." In an instant, dozens of glowing spheres spewed from his mouth like phoenix plum blossoms carried on a breeze, converging to form a perfect ring around the few remaining opponents. Water style, water array wall. Water style, water chaos. Two Kirigakure shinobi completed their seals in tandem, unleashing successive water jutsu that shattered most of the fireballs. Their defense tore a gap in Nathan's fiery encirclement, and the surviving soldiers seized the chance, slipping through the breach and scattering to safety. Nathan's eyes narrowed. He was already drawing on his next reserves of chakra when a sudden swarm of shuriken whistled toward him. These weren't the sluggish stars thrown by mid-rank warriors. They spun with deadly velocity and twisted along impossible angles, the work of true experts. Mid-air, Nathan halted himself as if stopping on a wire. With a swift motion, he drew a kunai from his belt and slashed outward. Each incoming shuriken met the steel of his blade and clattered harmlessly aside, their threat extinguished before they could close the distance. Nathan stood amidst a rain of shuriken, each one met by the ringing clash of his blade. In a matter of heartbeats, he'd cut every projectile in two. Now 5 Kirigakure jonin closed in on him. 2 wore the traditional flak jackets of full-fledged jonin. The other 3 were merely special jonin, far less formidable. Nathan barely glanced in their direction. His goal wasn't a death match. It was to disrupt the mist forces wherever possible. Why Tang live with these 5 when he could strike deeper into enemy ranks? With that thought, he opened his feathered wings, an ability few shinobi possessed, and prepared to lift off. But as soon as Nathan pivoted, dozens of kunai hissed through the air toward his back. He twisted just in time, letting the blades spark harmlessly off the stone beneath him. No sooner had he dodged them than jets of water, shaped into razor-sharp arrows, came hurtling his way. Nathan gritted his teeth. Retreat would have to wait. He slashed his sword in a low arc, deflecting the water projectiles into a nearby wall. Then, gathering chakra at his core, he leapt skyward, putting distance between himself and the circling jonin. High above the courtyard, he scanned for openings, an undefended gate, a patrol moving in from the east, anything that would let him slip into mist territory undetected. Below, the jonin broke formation. "After him!" one barked. "Surround the perimeter. Don't let him escape." Nathan tucked into a dive, his wings slicing through the air as he aimed for a narrow gap between 2 watchtowers. If he could reach the old sewer tunnel, rumored to run beneath the village, he might vanish entirely. But the jonin were quick. A second volley of kunai launched from the battlements forced him to veer off course, sending him skidding down the wet, mossy shingles of the southern tower. He landed in a crouch, water pooling around his feet. His wings snapped shut, folding tightly against his back. He was on enemy turf now, surrounded. And yet, in that moment, Nathan grinned. The real hunt was only just beginning. Nathan studied his opponents and realized 2 hidden mist shinobi had completed their hand seals the moment he dodged the kunai assault. Instantly, a water release escape jutsu formed in their hands, spawning a volley of crystalline arrows that hurtled toward him. He narrowed his eyes, brought his hand up in a swift seal, and unleashed his own counterattack. "Fire release, dragon flame technique," he roared. A massive, roaring dragon of flame erupted from his palm, charging through the air and colliding with the incoming water arrows. In an instant, each icy projectile evaporated in the beast's searing blaze. But the fight was far from over. No sooner had the fiery dragon dissolved than two new jutsu streaked toward him. The first was instantly recognizable. Water release, water dragon bullet technique, unleashing a coiling serpentine torrent. The second was rarer still, a wind release technique that condensed air into invisible, razor-sharp projectiles. Nathan rolled to safety as the water serpent lunged past him. Then barely perceptible air bullets sliced through the space he'd occupied moments before. Without the clarity of his Sharingan, those wind blades would have struck him without warning. Instead, he activated wind release, wind wings, folding the currents around himself and darting through the invisible onslaught with fluid bird-like grace. Each blast missed by mere inches as Nathan prepared for his next move. However, Nathan's momentary pause had given the mist ninjas just enough time to regroup. He watched as the scattered Kirigakure Jonin, who'd been pressing him, suddenly closed ranks, when 5 of their comrades tangled him in complex chakra threads. United, their offense and defense were far more formidable than in their previous disordered assault. He had to admit, these mist ninjas were good. Reforming so quickly was no small feat. Still, cohesion wasn't their strongest suit. With a sudden burst of speed, Nathan snapped free of the chakra binds, rocketed into the sky, then twisted in midair, ready to plunge back into the fray. Before he could dive, though, he spotted another wave of shinobi emerging from the southern mist. The reinforcements were already in formation, racing to join their allies below. At that velocity, they'd converge in under a minute, enough time to strengthen the enemy's position and make his task far more difficult. Nathan let out a quiet chuckle. He'd dispersed them once. He could do it Ang. Nathan hovered high above the battlefield, taking in every detail below. Through the haze of dust, he made out a formation of roughly 150 shinobi pouring out of the Blackstone Stronghold's south gate and racing toward his position. In barely a few minutes, Sano Nobuhisa had marshaled Konoha's reinforcements and sent them running to his aid. Nathan's brow furrowed. Only 150? Even after the losses he'd inflicted, the Mist Ninja in pursuit still boasted a combined strength equivalent to about 250 fighters, outnumbering Konoha's support by a full 100. At that ratio, he knew he couldn't hold them back without using every ounce of his power. Before he could formulate a plan, a wave of chakra and telepathic energy washed over him. Aoi Yamanaka's voice echoed in his mind. "Jonin Seimei, Nathan, the support force has departed." Nathan took a steadying breath and surveyed the advancing shinobi below. The real fight was about to begin. "Captain Sano has requested your help," Yamanaka Aoi said, her tone a mix of respect and urgency. "He needs you, Jonin Nathan, to reinforce the stronghold and keep the incoming Kiri shinobi at bay." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Only 150 support troops?" Aoi stiffened, clearly surprised he already knew their numbers. She hadn't said a word aloud. Then it clicked. His reputation for gathering intelligence by flight was well known. She sighed in relief. "Yes, Nathan, that's all we could spare." "Very well," Nathan replied, turning his gaze toward the distant smudge of smoke and clash of steel. "I'll make sure they don't get through." As he prepared to move out, Nathan couldn't help but smile wryly to himself. He'd hoped to play a more direct role in the battle, but once again, duty had pulled him into a different position. Even if he tried to lay low, his talents inevitably thrust him into the thick of things. He shook his head, steeling himself for the fight ahead. Nathan took a steadying breath, pushed his doubts aside, and replied, "Understood. Get them here as soon as possible." "Yes, Jonin Nathan?" Yamanaka Aoi answered, her voice echoing in his mind as she released the mind-opening technique. Rather than rushing in to meet the Mist Shinobi head-on, Nathan paused to analyze the recent mental jutsu. Even as the recipient, he'd gathered a wealth of data, especially since he'd already created his own version of the mind link art. Unconsciously, he realized he'd deepened his grasp of psychic connection. With a thought, he summoned his chakra management panel. His mind link proficiency had jumped by dozens of points, and he'd saved nearly 4,000 chakra in just that one exchange. Counting the previous mind-to-mind communications he'd shared with Aoi before the Mist Ninjas struck, her remote assistance had spared him over 10,000 chakra in total. A small smile crossed Nathan's face. Even in silence, their minds had formed a powerful partnership. Even 10,000 chakra points was nothing to Nathan at this stage. Still, he reminded himself that even a mosquito, no matter how tiny, had flesh on its legs. He didn't hesitate to squeeze every last bit of power out of it. Chapter 414, The Encounter. A swirl of thoughts raced through Nathan's mind, but he forced himself to calm down, shaking his head as he let them go. Below him lay one team of mist ninja. Another squad hovered less than 100 meters away. Weighing his options, Nathan decided to ignore the group directly beneath him for the moment, and instead turned his focus to the reinforcements arriving from behind. If the first team gave chase, he could stall both squads long enough. If they stayed on their original mission instead, Konoha's backup, already en route from the base, would pick up the slack. Splitting the enemy in two would even the odds, turning the confrontation into a fair duel. With a powerful flap of his chakra wings, Nathan surged forward. His speed spiked to its limit, and in the blink of an eye, he found himself hovering above the second Mist Ninja unit. He didn't bother with illusions or subtlety. Planting his feet on the air currents, he launched himself straight down in a decisive death charge aimed at the unsuspecting shinobi below. Nathan's Sharingan flared to life the moment the Mist Shinobi fell silent. At the hand signal of their captain, dozens of kunai streaked toward him, each blade blinking with the telltale shimmer of an explosive tag. He barely had time to think. Any attempt to mold chakra, form seals, or launch ninjutsu would be too slow. Yet Nathan never hesitated. In one fluid motion, he drew the long sword strapped to his waist, a blade that caught the sunlight in a brilliant arc. Clang after clang, he met each kunai on the edge of his sword, sending them spiraling harmlessly aside. Then, with another powerful stroke, he drove forward, slipping out of the blast radius, just as the explosive tags detonated. Boom after boom shattered the air. Fireballs bloomed behind him in a cascade of orange and red, their brilliance momentarily eclipsing the sun. But Nathan was already gone. Blades cut, shadows shifted, and he vanished into the haze of smoke and ash, unscathed. Nathan's speed was astonishing. He burst through the flames in a single bound, leaving the Mist Ninjas gaping in shock. Those who had just finished forming seals for a second jutsu froze. Expecting him to dodge, they were dumbstruck when he stood his ground. By the time they refocused, the moment to strike had slipped away. Unfazed, Nathan sized up the swirling onslaught of chakra blades and energy bolts. He drew a steady breath, channeling chakra into his skin until a soft wind whispered around him. Activating wind style, wind wings, he tilted his body just so, letting the currents carry him aside and deflect every incoming attack. In the next heartbeat, his sword slid back into its scabbard. His hands moved into a flawless sequence of seals, chakra spiraling outward. Wind style great breakthrough, he intoned. A roaring gale exploded forward, its razor-sharp winds sweeping across the field. It was the same jutsu he'd used before, and it hit with every bit the same ferocity. Even though the Mist Ninjas were on high alert after their last encounter, they'd been caught off guard by Nathan's sheer power. Without relying on the usual white fog for cover, he'd forced an opening through brute strength, and at that instant, their defeat was sealed. Nathan hovered silently above the uneven terrain, surveying the dozen or so Mist Ninjas sprawled and staggering below. He didn't rush in immediately. Instead, he cast a quick, assessing glance toward another squadron of Mist Shinobi gathering in the distance. When they made no move to retreat, he drew in a steady breath and struck. Wind style, wind blade. Nathan thrust out his hand. A razor-sharp gust ripped through the air, cleaving one ninja's defenses in half. Before the shock had even registered among his enemies, he followed up without hesitation. Fire style, great fireball technique, he called, releasing a massive sphere of scorching flame that barreled toward the next cluster of opponents. As the fireball detonated against their ranks, Nathan's palms glowed again. Fire style, Phoenix fire technique. A flock of fiery birds erupted around him, diving into the fray with screeches of molten heat. He didn't pause. Fire style, dragon fire technique. From his fingertips, a sinuous blazing dragon coiled forward, its roar rolling across the clearing. One jutsu bled seamlessly into the next, each tailored to cut down a different target, or scorch an entire group at once. Nathan showed no restraint, no concern for conserving chakra. His onslaught was surgical and devastating. In mere moments, 7 or 8 mist ninjas lay dead, more than a dozen writhed, injured. Before Nathan had landed his first blow, roughly 120 enemies had remained. Now nearly a sixth of them were incapacitated. Broken shields, torn uniforms, and the acrid stench of smoke filled the air. And through it all, not one of those ninjas had managed to land a single hit on him. They retreated in disarray, staggering, bewildered, and utterly shaken. Nathan hovered above them, calm and unmarked, the flicker of residual chakra still glowing at his fingertips as he watched them scramble away. After several clashes of strategy and nerve, the Mist Ninjas finally conceded defeat. Under their lieutenant's orders, they broke off pursuit and led their remaining forces toward the Blackstone stronghold. Nathan watched them go, then shifted his gaze farther ahead, where he saw the reinforcements from Konoha had already intercepted the retreating Mist unit. With the path ahead secured, he no longer needed to block their escape. Instead, Nathan slipped into the rearguard, striking from the shadows. Whenever a Mist Ninja lagged or stumbled over rough ground, he moved in, swift, silent, and deadly. Bit by bit, he picked them off, whittling their numbers as they regrouped with the Konoha squad. Before long, fewer than 100 survivors remained, each one shaken, exhausted, and on edge. But now that the two enemy contingents had joined forces, Nathan knew a frontal assault was out of the question. It wasn't that the Mist Ninjas posed any real threat. He could still outmatch them handily, but they were intermingled with the Konoha Shinobi. Any rash attack risked civilian casualties among the allies. He had no desire to waste lives that weren't his targets. Besides, the Mist Ninjas hadn't been idle. They'd spotted his guerrilla tactics and were on the lookout. For the moment, Nathan melted back into the terrain, content to observe and wait for a more opportune moment to strike. Nathan hovered at the edge of the fray, darting around the Konoha Shinobi to avoid drawing fire. From this vantage, he could have picked off stragglers one by one, but every moment he lingered, more of his allies fell to the 10 Kirigakure Jonin pressing their assault. If he kept skirmishing on the sidelines, the reinforcements that Sano Nobuhisa had sent, just 6 true and special Jonin, would be overwhelmed before he'd slain all 10 enemy veterans. He couldn't afford patience any longer. With decision hardening in his chest, Nathan steeled himself and dove into the thick of battle. Below him, a Konoha Jonin was beset by 3 Kirigakure attackers, blades flashing in close quarters. Drawing a deep breath, Nathan invoked his trademark technique, wind escape, gale wings. Black air shimmered around him, lifting him higher as his long sword leapt free of its scabbard. With a single fluid motion, Nathan descended upon the embattled comrade. The 3 enemy Jonin lunged simultaneously, steel clashing in a deadly chorus, but Nathan's blade moved faster than sight. He swept one attack aside with the flat of his sword, knocked another's kunai harmlessly skyward, and parried the third with a sharp twist of his wrist. Dust and leaves swirled as he landed between friend and foe. His wind wings dissolved into the air, leaving only the hum of his sword, a promise that the tide of battle had just shifted. Nathan stepped into the clearing as the other shinobi slid back, creating a wide berth around him. A Konoha Jonin, eyes bright with recognition, called out, "Jonin, Nathan!" Nathan offered a short nod, and without even turning his head, said, "Go help the others. These 3 are my responsibility." "Understood. Stay safe," the Jonin replied, then dashed off at once. His swift departure spoke volumes about his faith in Nathan's abilities. The 3 Kirigakure Jonin forming the perimeter made no move to block the exit. Instead, each man kept a wary eye on Nathan, fully aware of his reputation and unwilling to let their guard down for even a second. Chapter 4:15, Continuous Instant Kills. The roar of battle echoed all around them, but where Nathan and the 3 mist-hidden shinobi stood, an uncanny stillness prevailed. Each man watched the other in silence, the tension thick enough to taste. Seconds stretched into minutes, neither side willing to make the first move. Then a sudden gust of wind kicked up a swirl of sand and dust, momentarily blinding one of the mist-hidden ninja. Seizing the opportunity, Nathan's eyes narrowed. A faint green glow rippled along his body as he drew his long sword with silent precision. He unleashed the instant sword technique, his blade whistling through the air as he closed the distance in a heartbeat. "Watch out!" one of the mist shinobi shouted, hurling a kunai at the same instant. Despite Nathan's advantage, the ninja's reflexes were razor-sharp. He twisted his wrist and brought the kunai up just in time. The clash rang out, a crisp metallic clang, sending sparks dancing between their weapons. Nathan halted, blade humming against the kunai's edge. The three shinobi regrouped, forming a loose triangle around him, their eyes fierce beneath the misty veil of their masks. Dust drifted to the ground, and the battlefield's din seemed to fade, as if the world held its breath. Nathan felt the rhythm of combat quicken within him, every muscle coiled, every sense alert. Instinct guided his next move, but these were no ordinary adversaries. The Mist Hidden were famed for their unpredictable tactics. He would have to strike swiftly, decisively, or risk being encircled. And so the dance resumed, 3 against 1, each waiting for that split-second opening that could mean victory or defeat. The clash of steel and projectile sent sparks flying. Nathan's ears twitched at the impact, while his peripheral vision caught the glint of a kunai streaking toward him. With a subtle tilt of his head, he slipped sideways, letting the blade whistle past. Then, he drove off the ground, launching his sword in a swift, precise counterstroke. Kurosaki Takeo, the mist samurai facing him, barely managed to stay on his feet. Under Nathan's relentless pressure, he found himself forced into retreat. Nathan fixed his gaze on Takeo's eyes and, with a mere thought, activated his Manjikyo Sharingan to cast a powerful genjutsu. For a heartbeat, Takeo stared back. Then, sensing the impending illusion, he squeezed his eyelids shut. The technique fractured, leaving Nathan quietly disappointed. Without missing a beat, Nathan swung his left arm forward. In his palm, a pale blue orb of chakra formed and spun with terrifying speed, the perfected Rasengan. Over months of training, he had elevated this S-rank ninjutsu to level 7, dramatically boosting both its release speed and its concealment. Now, with the ball of energy pressed against Takeo's abdomen, it exploded in a concussive burst, driving the Mist Shinobi backward in a shockwave of raw power. Kurosaki Takeo shut his eyes on purpose, hoping to block Nathan's illusion Sharingan. Deprived of his vision, he had no chance to dodge the attack by reflex alone. With a sickening thud, Nathan slammed his left palm into Kurosaki's abdomen. Agony ripped through him. Kurosaki convulsed and spat out a mouthful of blood. The spray hit Nathan in the face, so he sheathed his tanto and flinched back to avoid the splatter. Seizing the moment, Kurosaki stumbled 2 steps backward and braced himself. But the damage was done. His strength was clearly sapped. The 2 hidden Mist Shinobi watching from the sidelines exchanged horrified glances. They hadn't expected their comrade to be incapacitated so quickly. Kurosaki Takeo was a skilled special jonin and an expert tracker, but because he'd underestimated Nathan's precision, he'd been left grievously wounded before he even knew what hit him. There would be no rescue this time. A bitter silence fell over them. This was the harsh reality of ninja warfare. The gap in strength between Nathan and Kurosaki Takeo was simply too great. In the ninja world, unless you possess a sudden protagonist pow, a battle is often decided with a single well-placed strike. Most shinobi are too fragile to withstand a full-force blow. Nathan had already proved the point by cutting Takeo down in an instant. He turned on the spot, fixing his gaze on the 2 remaining opponents. A faint smirk played across his lips. "All right," he said coolly. "Whose turn is it?" "How arrogant," one of the mist-hidden shinobi spat, hurling a kunai before frantically forming hand seals to launch a jutsu. But Nathan didn't give him a chance. With a single, fluid motion, he sidestepped the spinning blade and closed the distance in a heartbeat. A pale green aura flared around him as he drew on his chakra and activated his instant sword technique. Before the jonin could complete his seals, Nathan was already standing inches away, his blade poised for the kill. Nathan's movements were a blur, echoing the swift swordplay of Iron Country General Mifune himself. The Kirigakure jonin across from him barely had time to form hand seals before Nathan's blade struck again. A streak of steel flashed through the air as Nathan lunged forward, aiming at his opponent's neck. At the last instant, Mihara Takuya abandoned his seal, sprang off the ground with a double-footed kick, and somersaulted backward to evade the slash. Undeterred, Nathan closed the distance in a single step, raised his long knife overhead, and brought it down in a vicious arc. Clang! Metal rang against metal as Takuya yanked a kunai from his pouch and planted its tip against Nathan's blade. Sparks scattered across the battlefield. Nathan's eyes narrowed. He tapped into his Sharingan, ready to weave a genjutsu and trap Takuya's mind, only to find his opponent already slipping back out of reach. Takuya's reflexes were nothing short of uncanny. He rolled to his feet and, with one last cautious glance over his shoulder, bounded away before Nathan could press the advantage. Watching him flee, Nathan readied himself to pursue. Nathan's heart skipped a beat the moment the Thunder Beast surged in from his flank, crackling with lethal chakra as it barreled straight toward his face. "Thunder escape jutsu?" he gasped. He caught a glimpse of the beast, and beyond it, a mist ninja from the opposing side. No question, this towering canine construct was pure ninjutsu, molded and directed by that hidden shinobi. The enemy's hands were still weaving seals, channeling chakra into the Thunder Beast even now. Sensing the threat, Nathan didn't hesitate. He called upon his body flicker technique, his form blurring as he vanished from sight. The Thunder Beast leapt after him, jaws snapping, but it struggled to keep pace with his lightning-fast movement. On the sidelines, Yamada Shinichi nodded to himself. Recognizing that pursuit alone wouldn't finish Nathan, he reshaped his seals in an instant and detonated the construct. A searing flash engulfed the clearing as the Thunder Beast erupted in a deafening boom, splintering into streaks of raw lightning that screamed outward in all directions. Nathan felt a sudden tingle crawl across his skin, electric numbness racing up his limbs. Timing his next move to perfection, he sprang upward, arching over the first volley of lightning bolts, just before they shredded the ground where he had stood. Landing lightly on a nearby rock, Nathan steadied himself, eyes narrowed. The air still hummed with residual electricity, and he knew the real fight was only beginning. Nathan's feet hit the ground again, and though he still felt the electric sting coursing through him, it was markedly weaker this time. Annoyance flickered in his chest. Without hesitation, he drew in a deep breath and poured every last drop of chakra into an explosive burst. Instantly, a power wave radiated outward, scattering the stray strands of lightning chakra that had invaded his body. Nathan cracked his neck, relishing the release of tension, then fixed his eyes on Yamada Shinichi and Mihara Takuya. With a deafening crack, the earth beneath Nathan detonated, hurling dirt and rocks skyward, and then he was gone. In the next heartbeat, he reappeared directly in front of the nearer, more vulnerable Mihara Takuya. Takuya's eyes widened in panic. "You." He tried to speak, but Nathan's presence alone had unhinged him. Now, struck before he could steady himself, he was utterly defenseless. A sizzling hiss cut through the air as Nathan's blade bit into flesh and blood. Clang! The kunai slipped from Mihara Takuya's grasp and clattered to the floor. He clutched at his throat with both hands, eyes locked on Nathan as he let out a strangled, incoherent gasp. With a final, hollow thud, Takuya collapsed to the ground. Chapter 416, Fierce Battle! "Takuya, damn it!" Yamada Shinichi swore under his breath as he watched Mihara Takuya fall, a single stroke from Nathan's blade sending him to the ground. Heart pounding, Shinichi darted his eyes left and right, then quickly formed a hand seal to unleash another ninjutsu. Thunder Release, Leisuo. In an instant, a crackling ribbon of violet lightning shot forward like a living serpent, wrapping itself around Nathan's torso. But Nathan, well aware of the power behind Shinichi's thunder technique, refused to be ensnared. He twisted his body sharply, narrowly slipping free of the first coil. Yet the lightning whip didn't dissipate. It recoiled in midair, its glowing tendrils lashing out again and again, stalking him like a venomous snake. Nathan frowned and planted both feet firmly. With a single explosive shove of his legs, he changed direction 3 times in the span of a heartbeat, but the electrified chain held on, clinging to him as tenaciously as gangrene. Sparks danced across Nathan's skin, searing his robes. He ground his teeth and snorted. At that moment, Nathan allowed himself to be caught. He pivoted on his heel, met the oncoming lightning coil head-on, and raised his long knife in a horizontal arc. The blade caught the crackling energy, and for a heartbeat, the air around them swirled with blinding light. "Is that all you've got?" Nathan taunted, voice low and steady. The thunder rope quivered, then snapped like a broken wire, scattering sparks across the sand. Shinichi's eyes widened in disbelief as Nathan seized the moment, stepping forward, his knife gleaming with fresh intent. The battlefield fell silent for a single tense second. Then, with impossible speed, Nathan lunged. The clash of steel and thunder rang out, heralding the next stage of their deadly duel. Just before Nathan's blade could be struck down, he channeled a surge of wind-released chakra into the long knife, its edge humming with renewed energy. Crackle. With a single precise thrust, he cut through the oncoming lightning cord as though it were paper. In the elemental interplay of chakra, wind is a poor conductor of lightning and readily disrupts its flow, and Nathan's raw chakra output far outmatched his opponent's. Without resorting to any additional ninjutsu or mechanical advantage, he had shattered the attack in one clean stroke, a display easily worthy of B-rank status. Yamada Shinichi's eyes went wide with disbelief. He'd expected his technique to carry the day, not be cleaved in half, but there was no time to dwell on it. Snapping back to focus, Yamada formed a seal and instantly unleashed another jutsu. Thunder Release. Two-headed wolf. Crackle, crackle. Two towering thunderwolves, each as massive as a full-grown warrior, materialized amid a wild dance of lightning. Their crackling forms advanced with predatory grace, ready for the next strike. Yamada Shinichi roared, "Go!" In an instant, two thunderous wolves materialized on either side of him and hurtled toward Nathan with terrifying speed, like savage beasts unleashed from a cage. This thunder-released twin wolves was an enhanced version of the Thunder Beast summoning ninjutsu Shinichi had used before. Rather than a single, indistinct creature, these were two sleek, powerful wolves crackling with electric energy, and their explosive force would detonate on impact. Nathan didn't hesitate. He slid his sword into a guard position, formed a quick hand seal, and unleashed his own technique, Wind Release, Gale Blade. A translucent blade of razor-sharp wind burst from his outstretched hand, slicing directly across the path of the right-hand wolf. The beast let out a feral howl as it collided with the invisible edge, sparks flying from its fur and a jagged gash opening along its side. Reeling from the cut, the thunder wolf skidded to a halt, momentarily stunned by Nathan's precise strike. Nathan didn't look back. He sprang sideways to evade the thunder wolf barreling in from his left. No hesitation followed. He wove a fresh set of hand seals and unleashed his next jutsu. Water Release, Great Shark Bullet. Instantly, a massive shark materialized, its jaws snapping hungrily as it hurtled toward the thunder wolf. Thanks to the Sharingan's precognitive vision, Nathan calculated the wolf's evasive trajectory perfectly. With one decisive chomp, the water shark latched onto its target. Stripped of any chance to counterattack by the jutsu's chakra-suppressing effect, the thunder wolf's energy surged into the shark, feeding the technique. As the aquatic beast swelled to colossal size, the wolf diminished under its power, its defeat all but assured. Damn it! Blow it up! Not far away, Yamada Shinichi watched the scene unfold. His eyes narrowed with frustration. Muttering a curse, he formed his own seals in rapid succession and detonated the thunder wolf from within. The moment the thunder exploded, a blinding bolt of lightning struck the shark-shaped chakra missile. Electricity crackled through the air as the water release, shark bullet jutsu, once coiling around the projectile like a ravenous wolf, dissipated in a spectacular flash. In theory, this A-rank water technique could absorb and neutralize almost any ninjutsu, but its power came with a built-in cap on both absorption rate and total chakra it could devour. The self-destructive Thunderwolf unleashed a tidal wave of chakra that shattered those limits, and with it, both the jutsu and the summoning beast were annihilated in an instant. No sooner had that threat vanished than another Thunderwolf, Yamada Shinichi's backup, materialized beside its fallen companion. Nathan responded without hesitation. Summoning a gale of wind around his blade, he unleashed a single colossal slashing arc. The summoned beast was cleaved cleanly in two, its roar cut short as the wind blade dispersed. With both of Shinichi's Thunderwolves gone, Nathan had eradicated the immediate crisis. He didn't pause to rest. Drawing his sword in one seamless motion, he activated the instant sword technique. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance between them. A shard of cold steel light cut through the air. Nathan's long blade flashed once, and before his opponent could even raise a defense, it whistled across his throat. The man's eyes widened in shock. and then went still. Nathan stood over him, his breathing steady, the battlefield silent, but for the dying echo of thunder. A cold breeze seemed to sweep off Nathan's blade. Yamada Shinichi jerked his head back just in time to avoid the strike. Whoosh! The sword slashed through the air, its wind nature chakra tearing Shinichi's tunic and scoring a shallow cut across his chest. He felt the sting, planted his foot, and retreated on a diagonal. Nathan pressed forward without missing a beat, stepping in close and swinging his long blade at Shinichi's torso. Shinichi twisted his body sideways, and the sword whistled past him. Back and forth they went, Nathan attacking, Shinichi dodging, in a fierce, exhilarating dance of steel. Yet if you watched closely, it was always Nathan on offense, and Shinichi barely keeping pace on defense. Shinichi was a true jonin, equally skilled in ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu, with no obvious weakness. But Nathan's relentless pressure left him no opening, to strike back with his fists, to weave a spell, or even to cast a diversionary jutsu. And that's before we even get to ninjutsu. Once Nathan closed the distance, Shinichi could no longer rely on genjutsu. Nathan's Sharingan simply overpowered any illusion before it could form. Stripped of his strongest tool, Shinichi fell back on taijutsu alone. Fortunately for him, his mastery of lightning escape amplified his reflexes just enough to keep pace with Nathan's blade. Any slower, and he'd have been cut down in an instant. But after several breathless minutes of high-intensity combat, Nathan had already mapped out Shinichi's every move. All he needed now was to activate the full insight of his Sharingan and strike the one weak point he'd uncovered. Even Shinichi's lightning release techniques wouldn't him then. With that certainty in mind, Nathan unleashed his full power, pressing the attack without mercy. Caught in the whirlwind of blows, Shinichi Yamada suddenly realized he was teetering on the edge of defeat. Chapter 417, Water Transformation Technique. A sharp clang rang out as Nathan's sword met Yamada Shinichi's kunai. With a single fluid motion, Nathan knocked the throwing knife aside. Before Shinichi could recover, Nathan twisted his wrist and slashed across his chest, carving a long, bleeding gash. Ugh! Shinichi reeled from the searing pain, stumbling backward to put distance between them. He fumbled for another kunai, desperate to keep Nathan at bay, but Nathan closed the gap in an instant. A cold gleam danced along Nathan's blade as he raised it for a finishing strike aimed at Shinichi's neck. Shinichi's eyes widened. He had nowhere left to dodge. At that critical moment, a kunai flew in from the side, thudding into the ground mere inches from Nathan's sword. Nathan's peripheral vision caught the flash of metal, and he knew that if he followed through on his swing, the incoming blade would pierce him. Even if it didn't kill him, it would cripple him. He allowed himself a barely perceptible pause. Whoever had launched that kunai had timed it perfectly. Nathan's mind raced. Ally or enemy? Either way, the interruption had saved Shinichi from a lethal blow and given Nathan the split second he needed to reconsider his next move. Snort. Nathan let out a cold snort and paused his attack. With a subtle twist of his body, he slid his sword back into its sheath, then swung its scabbard in a clean horizontal arc, knocking the incoming kunai aside in a single fluid motion. In that moment of defense, Yamada Shinichi seized his chance and slipped free. Without hesitation, Shinichi bounded backward, creating distance between them. Nathan didn't give chase. He merely cast a dismissive glance at the fleeing shinobi and turned away. From their brief clash, he'd already cataloged Shinichi's tactics. Recreating the same opening would be straightforward, and finishing him off when he was down to less than half his strength would take no effort. Pursuit wasn't warranted. Instead, Nathan shifted his attention to the two Kirigakure Jonin flanking him. One strode in from his left, the other from his right, mist veils swirling around their forms as they closed the distance. Now, this was a fight worth his focus. Nathan glanced back at the two Kirigakure Jonin and saw a Konoha shinobi collapse to the ground, his throat ruthlessly slit. Originally, 6 Jonin from Konoha had been dispatched to support the mission, matched against 10 from Kirigakure. Earlier, one of the Konoha Jonin had single-handedly subdued 3 enemies, but 7 opponents still remained. 7 against 6. 5 of the Konoha Jonin were locked in one-on-one duels, and only this fallen Jonin found himself caught between 2 adversaries. In such a lopsided engagement, casualties were almost inevitable, Few jonin possessed the skill to face multiple foes at once and come out unscathed. In truth, aside from a handful of prodigies, most jonin were simply well-trained shinobi whose fighting strength didn't differ dramatically. In a straight duel, victory odds hovered around 50-50, at worst maybe 60-40, and that slight edge all but vanished amid the chaos of battle. Only a rare few elite jonin could claim significantly higher win rates. Clearly, this Konoha jonin was not among them. Nathan faced two opponents of equal rank, an uphill battle in any shinobi contest. But these adversaries might not even be on the same tier as him. He spared a glance for the Kirigakure jonin standing to his right. Through his Sharingan, Nathan analyzed the man's chakra, a steady, high-intensity flow that far surpassed the average jonins, with one particular chakra network locked perpetually in activation, no doubt sustaining a hidden ninjutsu. Compared to the fallen Konoha jonin he just dispatched, this Kirigakure veteran looked every bit the elite. Still, assumptions meant little on the battlefield. Nathan ignited a green aura and unleashed his instant sword technique. In a flash, his speed rocketed to its ceiling, and in the next heartbeat, he was already before the Kirigakure, Onin. The two locked eyes, and Nathan prepared to weave an illusion with his Sharingan. He could practically taste the victory. But his opponent was no fool. Almost the instant Nathan's Sharingan clicked open, the Kirigakure jonin closed his eyes, completely denying Nathan the visual link he needed for genjutsu. The jonin's reflexes and his ability to sniff out danger were razor-sharp. Now Nathan would have to think quickly. Raw power alone wouldn't win this fight. Nathan hesitated for only a heartbeat before recommitting to the attack. Steel sang as he lunged, his longsword arcing toward the Kirigakure jonin's throat. The sharp clang of metal on metal rang out when the jonin lifted his dagger to intercept. Before his opponent could recover, Nathan closed the distance. He pivoted sideways, evading a retaliatory slash, and simultaneously pressed in, his short blade gliding along the length of the jonin's sword as he drove it toward the exposed neck. Sparks erupted at the contact point, accompanied by a harsh, grinding screech. Nathan's eyes lit up. In that one exchange of parry and riposte, he'd tested his adversary's skill and found it formidable. Every lesson he had absorbed, both the swift, flowing strikes of Konoha-style fencing and the unorthodox, lightning-quick counters of Uchiha blade work, clicked into place. He felt a surge of satisfaction, remembering Master Shunshin's rigorous training sessions. His hybrid swordsmanship was paying off. Nathan had perfected the hybrid sword style born from two ancient schools, and on top of that he'd devised two secret techniques, instant swordsmanship and phantom swordsmanship. Thanks to those refinements, few sword-wielding ninja dared challenge him. Now, having finally met someone whose skill intrigued him, Nathan was eager to demonstrate what true mastery looked like. With that thought, he dipped backward, narrowly evading a stab from his opponent's short blade. Without a word of courtesy, he countered with seamless precision, unleashing his perfected style. Blades rang in rapid succession, ting-ting-dang-dang, as steel met steel in a furious rhythm. Nathan's instincts had been spot on. This adversary really was formidable. Against an average jonin, even a momentary slip would have been fatal, just as it had been for the Konoha jonin who'd fallen here. The challenger's skill reminded Nathan of his own abilities before the Mangekyo Sharingan awakening, back when he could dispatch multiple jonin on swordsmanship alone. But that level of prowess no longer sufficed against Nathan. In both pure technique and overarching strength, this fighter was leagues beyond a typical jonin, and Nathan planned to prove it. Nathan pressed his blade forward, eyes narrowed. Throughout their duel, neither he nor his opponent had spared the other a single weakness. They were evenly matched, testing each other's skill to its absolute limit, until, in a single heartbeat, Nathan spotted the opening he'd been searching for. With a swift arc of his sword, he aimed straight for the man's neck. But there was no sickening slice of flesh, no crimson spray. Instead, the moment Nathan's steel neared its mark, his foe's neck, and then half his body, seemed to melt into liquid. Nathan stumbled back, heart pounding. Water transformation technique? Recognition flooded him in an instant. The fluid form was unmistakable. It belonged to the legendary water transformation secret technique of the Kirigakure Kizuna clan. His adversary must be a core member of that clandestine ninja family, for such a forbidden art was not taught to outsiders. And in that moment, everything clicked. The strange ripple Nathan had felt surging through his own limbs earlier. It hadn't been a figment of his imagination, but the same water transformation technique, awakening within him. It wasn't a fully active jutsu, but a semi-passive ability. Yet that made perfect sense. If it weren't, how could the very spot struck by an attack instantaneously turn to water the moment it was hit? If you had to foresee the blow and then trigger the V technique at exactly the right millisecond, it would be utterly impractical and hardly worthy of being the Hozuki clan's guarded secret. Could I learn it? Nathan caught himself wondering, but he shook his head almost immediately. Mastering the so-called water transformation wouldn't be as simple as channeling chakra. There were countless preparatory steps, and more importantly, specialized seals and protections embedded in the clan's scrolls. Even if he managed to defeat a Hozuki and probe his mind, those safeguards would keep the vital knowledge locked away. So relying on his Sharingan to copy the technique outright wasn't an option. As for reverse engineering it, that was Orochimaru's game, not his. If he really wanted to use his time wisely, Nathan thought, he'd be better off sharpening his proficiency in the reflection heart technique. After all, it was just a water-based defense. Could it ever rival the sheer might of his heaven's control? Chapter 418. 1 against 3 Jianyue. The Lantern Ghost didn't know what Nathan was planning, and frankly, he didn't care. He was simply taken aback that Nathan instantly recognized the secret technique he had just unleashed. That moment of surprise passed in an instant, replaced by fierce determination. Water release. Rich water wrist, Jianyue roared. In a flash, he drew every droplet of moisture in his body into his right arm, causing his skin to glisten like liquid armor. Then he lunged forward, dagger arcing toward Nathan's throat with merciless speed. Alarm bells rang in Nathan's head. He stepped back, sliding the sword from its sheath to meet the attack at an angle. Steel rang out as blade met dagger, the clash echoing through the courtyard like thunder. Zanyue's hydrokinesis imbued the strike with an almost tidal force, driving Nathan backward 3 steps in a single blow. Nathan steadied himself, heart pounding. The raw power in Zanyue's arm was unlike anything he'd faced before. Is this really the water release technique? He wondered, brow furrowed. Before he could fully recover, Jianyue pressed the advantage. He advanced again, dagger raised for another merciless strike. Nathan tightened his grip, bracing for the next exchange. The duel had only just begun. Nathan could have dodged the strike, but seeing Jianyue's barely restrained chakra flare along his arm, he chose otherwise. He drew in a steady breath, channeled chakra from his core, and, relying on the medical training he'd mastered, tensed the precise muscles in his arms, waist, and abdomen. Then he swung his sword in one clean arc. Clang! Steel rang against steel. Nathan's wrist went numb as Jianyue's long sword slammed into his own, nearly wrenching it free from his grip. The shock coursed through Jianyue, too. The enhanced chakra in his thick right arm winked out. In an instant, the water release, art of water escape that had fortified him collapsed. You bastard! Jianyue ground through clenched teeth, glaring at Nathan's youthful face. Nathan offered no reply. He launched another strike without hesitation. Jianyue threw up his dagger to block, but without the water release ninjutsu's blessing, he simply couldn't match Nathan's strength. Under the relentless force of Nathan's blade, Jianyue was driven steadily backward. Nathan's improvised strategy paid off. He sheathed his finesse and let sheer force drive every blow, hammering at Jianyue with relentless power. The Ghost Lantern Jonin hesitated, unwilling to cede the initiative, and met each strike head-on rather than dodging. Their sparring regressed into a brutal test of strength, echoes of a simpler, more primal duel. Then, without warning, a volley of shuriken whistled across the courtyard. Nathan's instincts flared. He dropped out of the blade's flight path, the projectiles thudding harmlessly into the ground where his midsection had been moments before. He snapped his head toward the source. There, standing at the edge of the battlefield, was another Kirigakure Jonin, eyes narrowed, posture taut, as if poised to unleash another salvo. Recognition flickered in Nathan's mind. This was the same shinobi who had conspired with Onito Zangetsu to ambush the Konoha Jonin. Though his chakra reserves may have prevented earlier interference, he'd watched Nathan and Jianyue clash, waiting for an opening. Now he had it. Nathan stilled, blade in hand, and met the newcomer's unwavering glare. The fight with Ghost Lantern Jianyue might have been his focus a breath ago, but now he stood between two hidden adversaries, ready to defend himself against a fresh threat. The air crackled with tension, every eye on him, every breath a promise of the next deadly exchange. Nathan's eyes snapped open. 3 more shuriken whooshed toward him under the moonlight. His Sharingan flared, tracing each blade's arc in an instant. With the precision of a born Uchiha, he shifted his stance and launched a rapid volley of kunai, each one meeting its target, deflecting the shuriken just enough to send them clatter into the ground. But Onito Zangetsu was ready. In the space of a heartbeat, he wove hand seals so fast his fingers seemed to blur. His fingertips hardened into iron-like spears as he channeled chakra. Water release, iron water bullet, he roared, and a high-velocity jet of liquid surged forward, aimed straight for Nathan's head. If it struck, the impact would be as devastating as a melon exploding. Nathan felt the chill of impending danger. Without hesitation, he poured blazing fire nature chakra along the length of his long sword. The blade glowed crimson as he braced himself and swung upward. In the next breath, steel met water in a thunderous collision. Steam hissed, sparks flew, and the very ground trembled beneath the force of their clash. The campfire's flames roared higher, and Nathan was slammed backward by the blast, skidding several feet across the scorched earth. The single drop of liquid Ghost Lantern Jianyue had unleashed winked out the moment it met the inferno. Jianyue's eyes went wide in disbelief. He'd expected his attack to at least stagger Nathan, yet here Nathan stood, unscathed, and more dangerously, poised to strike back. The misstep also ruptured Jianyue's timing with the Kirigakure Jonin nearby. Seizing the opening, Nathan whispered the words of his snap sword technique. In an instant, he became a blur, an afterimage shimmering in the firelight, then reappeared right beside the Jonin, Takashima Ichiro. A chill swept through the air as Nathan swung his blade. Takashima tasted the cold edge of death in that arc and instinctively lunged back to evade it. But the moment he retreated, Nathan's single sword split cleanly into 2 identical blades, each slicing toward him from opposite sides. Takashima froze, confusion and alarm flashing across his face. He raised his arms in a desperate attempt to block both strikes. "This can't be," he muttered, as Nathan's twin swords descended in perfect harmony. Nathan's momentary hesitation cost him everything. With a sharp hiss, his blade bit into flesh. Ichiro Takashima had reacted at the last possible instant, but his mind was still fogged by Nathan's phantom sword technique. He couldn't fully evade, and Nathan's knife scored a deep cut across his arm. Blood seeped through Takashima's sleeve as Nathan pressed his advantage, ready to strike again. In that instant, a crackling bolt of lightning streaked across the clearing. It morphed into what looked like a rope of pure electricity, winding itself tightly around Nathan's wrist. Nathan jerked his head toward the newcomer. Yamada Shinichi stood there, fingers twisting into a series of hand seals. From his palms shot twin bolts of lightning, each serpentine filament lashing at Nathan's arm. Nathan's eyes flicked downward to the bandages wrapped around Shinichi's chest, a clear sign that his previous knife wound had been treated and some of his strength restored. "Huh?" Nathan muttered under his breath. He suddenly recognized the opponent before him, the same Shinichi who had been gravely injured by Nathan's Rasengan not long ago. Realizing who this was, Nathan's gaze sharpened, sweeping the battlefield as he prepared for the next move. Nathan spotted the fallen figure in the distance and froze. The man lay slumped on the ground, face twisted in pain, his clothes soaked crimson. The Rasengan had devastated him far worse than the knife wound Shinichi Yamada once endured. Even the most advanced healing jutsu would take far longer to mend such damage. Against the backdrop of his enemy's resilience, this unexpected weakness brought Nathan a flicker of relief. He pulled his gaze away and coiled for action. With a powerful kickoff, he sprang backward, so swiftly that the crackling bolt of lightning, meant to trap him, sliced through his afterimage and struck only empty air. Nathan landed lightly, heart hammering, and swept his eyes over the 3 opponents before him, Kazuna Zangetsu, Shinichi Yamada, and Ichiro Takashima. All three were already regrouping, faces set in grim determination, clearly plotty, gnawing to corner and kill him. For a tense heartbeat, the battlefield fell silent. Dust swirled around them. Distant groans of the wounded pulsed like a second heartbeat. Then, in perfect unison, Nathan and his three adversaries sprang forward, the air crackling with unleashed chakra. The final clash was about to begin. Nathan darted forward, only to find Kazuna Zangetsu, Yamada Shinichi, and Takashima Ichiro peeling off in unison. They fanned out in a perfect triangular formation, cutting off every avenue of escape. Unfazed, Nathan skidded to a halt. With a sharp intake of breath, he thrust his hands together and wove his fingers into the complex Hate seal. In that desperate moment, he called upon his most prized secret, the shadow clone technique. In the blink of an eye, Nathan blurred and multiplied, birthing two perfect copies of himself. Now 3 Nathans stood poised, each one locking eyes with one of his opponents. Without hesitating, all 3 charged, chakra crackling around them. In an instant, steel rang against steel, and the air filled with explosive bursts of power. The clash had begun. Chapter 419, targeting ding, ding. Nathan's longsword and the kunai before him rang out in a rapid series of metal strikes. He directed his true body straight at Shinichi Yamada. Of the 3 mist-hidden ninjas facing him, Yamada was the one with whom Nathan had the most bouts, and the one whose style he knew best. Moreover, Nathan's chest still smarted from a half-healed wound, sapping his strength. It made him the logical choice for the spearhead of their assault. Nathan didn't hesitate. He unleashed a surge of chakra, splitting himself into 2 shadow clones and throwing them into the fray. His plan was simple: force a one-on-one duel and pick his opponents off in turn. Yet the move was so transparent that all 3 opponents saw through it immediately. They tightened their guard, refusing to be lured into wasting effort on fakes. Aside from the swift counters needed to ward off Nathan's blows, they made no additional attacks, focusing 70 to 80% of their attention on pure defense. Silently, they shifted to maintain lethal proximity, each ready to exploit the slightest opening. Nathan sized up his 3 opponents. Whichever one he struck, the other 2 would react in an instant to back him up. Jonin of the highest caliber, he thought. Your battlefield experience shows. He admired their coordinated defense, but inwardly sighed. He had hoped to conserve his strength, yet it was clear that half measures wouldn't suffice. Resolute, he let go of all restraint and attacked Yamada Shinichi with everything he had. His sudden, full-power assault snapped Kazuna Zangetsu and Takashima Ichiro to attention. Were they being drawn into a trap, or was Nathan genuinely committing to Shinichi? Before they could decide, 2 perfect shadow clones peeled off from Nathan's form, each mirroring his lethal intent. In the next heartbeat, the originals and their shadows struck in unison. The clones stormed Zangetsu and Ichiro to stall them, while Nathan pressed his onslaught on Shinichi. Their goal was simple: to buy Nathan the precious seconds he needed to finish off Yamada Shinichi. Kazuna Zangetsu and Takashima Ichiro both realized in that instant that the Qingming who'd struck Yamada Shinichi was almost certainly Nathan's real body. Unfortunately, even if they'd wanted to intervene, there simply wasn't time. Nathan's chakra reserves had now climbed past the 100,000 mark. Split among 3 shadow clones, each still carried roughly 35,000 chakra, more than enough to offset the usual frailty of a clone's form. It wasn't that the clones suddenly became tougher, rather, they could shift their tactics completely. By unleashing a continuous volley of jutsu, transforming their chakra into a kind of ninjutsu machine gun, they kept the enemy off balance and avoided head-on clashes. With Nathan's mastery and perfect proficiency in several powerful techniques, his clones could sustain an unrelenting barrage. In effect, the sheer volume of chakra allowed them to overwhelm opponents before taking the kinds of crippling blows that would normally shatter a shadow clone's body. The moment Nathan unleashed his technique, its speed became terrifyingly fast, more than enough to neutralize ordinary shinobi, at least in the short term. Already, Kazuna Zangetsu and Takashima Ichiro found themselves trapped by his relentless onslaught. Their 2 shadow clones exhausted chakra after chakra, desperately casting every ninjutsu in their arsenal, but each attack was parried or driven back. Caught off guard, The real Zangetsu and Ichiro had no choice but to retreat, their own safety slipping through their fingers, even as they struggled to assist Yamada Shinichi. With his opponents occupied, Nathan finally enjoyed the undisturbed battlefield he needed. Drawing on every lesson from his earlier skirmishes, he attacked with unreserved ferocity. His 3 Magatama Sharingan flared to life, pushing his perception to its limits and allowing him to strike with uncanny precision. Yamada Shinichi, unsettled by Nathan's relentless advance, fell into a purely defensive stance, exactly the opening Nathan sought. In one sweeping motion, his long sword arced through the air. Shinichi managed a last-second block, but the force rocked him back half a step. Staggered by the impact, he struggled to regain his footing as Nathan closed in for the next strike. Nathan seized the moment. He felt chakra surge through his veins, his right arm and core muscles instantly locking into place with newfound power. "Ha!" he roared, withdrawing his blade and driving it down in a fierce diagonal slash aimed at Shinichi's neck, chest, and abdomen. Shinichi's eyes flew open in alarm. He thrust his kunai up with every ounce of strength to meet the attack, but Nathan's strike was overwhelming. Already off balance from the earlier blow, Shinichi simply couldn't hold. Clang! The ring of metal on metal echoed as sword met kunai. A brutal recoil slammed into Shinichi's arm, sending a jolt of numbness through his limb. He stumbled backward, the reopened gash on his chest tearing through its bandage. Dark red blood seeped out, staining the cloth. Nathan pressed forward without hesitation, closing the distance in a single, determined stride. Swish! A flash of cold steel met Yamada Shinichi's blade as Nathan struck again. Shinichi planted his feet and forced his sword up to block. Ding! The impact sent a shockwave through both their arms. Shinichi staggered back, pressed against a massive boulder, but he held his ground. Nathan advanced without mercy, launching a rapid series of cuts that clanged and rang through the air. Each time Shinichi parried, his arms shook under the relentless assault. Finally, Nathan brought his blade down in a devastating arc. The rock behind Shinichi cracked like glass, and the tip of Nathan's sword hovered just inches from his throat. Shinichi's eyes widened. For a moment, he tasted death. Then, with a startled cry, he unleashed the chakra coiling beneath his skin. Lightning crackled across his body, and in an instant he blurred from view. Nathan's sword struck the boulder and split it cleanly in two, the force of Shinichi's lightning chakra rebounding like a hurricane. Calmly sheathing his sword, Nathan turned his head. Not 10 paces away, Shinichi crouched, shoulders heaving, light fading in his eyes as he gasped for breath. Nathan's eyes darted over his opponent's ruined form. Shinichi Yamada stood before him, his clothes singed to ash, patches of charred flesh mottling his skin. A faint, acrid scent of burning meat still lingered in the air. There was no mistaking it. Shinichi had tapped into forbidden arts to land that near-fatal blow. Such dark techniques, however, came at a steep cost. They couldn't be wielded repeatedly in quick succession. Nathan knew this meant Shinichi had likely spent all his reserves. Seizing the moment, Nathan summoned the green aura that clung to his blade. Energy crackled along its edge as he activated the instant sword technique. In the space of a heartbeat, he blurred forward, closing the gap between them. Before Shinichi could even draw a breath, Nathan's blade sliced through the air. Chapter 420, Defeat Them One by One. A sharp whisper of steel-cutting flesh split the air. Yamada Shinichi sprang back, narrowly evading Nathan's first strike, but the second came too fast. Nathan allowed no reaction time. As Shinichi staggered, Nathan unleashed his illusion sword technique, slashing cleanly across Shinichi's throat. The clang of falling metal echoed when the kunai slipped from Shinichi's grip. He pressed a trembling hand to the wound, eyes locking on Nathan as if searching for mercy. A rasp escaped his lips, but no words followed. With a heavy thud, his body collapsed to the ground. Nathan inhaled slowly, then shifted his gaze to the 2 shinobi entangled by his shadow clone. They'd been so focused on the clone's bindings that they'd missed the fatal strike. Until now. Kazuna Zangetsu met Nathan's eyes without flinching. His pride in his own strength left him confident that he would not be the next to fall. But across the clearing, Takashima Ichiro, an elite jonin known for his composure, could only stare, pupils pinning him in a mix of dread and disbelief. The chill in the air spoke the truth. Nathan was a force they could no longer underestimate. Nathan was well aware of Yamada Shinichi's strength. It far surpassed his own. Now, Shinichi lay dead by Nathan's hand. If their mysterious attacker struck next, Nathan would likely suffer the same fate, or worse. And judging by Nathan's blood-stained appearance, it was obvious their enemy would go after him or Hozuki Zangetsu next. Though he kept his face calm, Hozuki sensed Nathan's tension immediately. Nathan glanced at his left arm, still bleeding from the slash Hozuki had dealt him when he tried to intervene in the fight between Shinichi and Hozuki. Then, only Shinichi's timely rescue had enabled his escape. With Shinichi gone, Nathan had no one left to rely on. Steeling himself, he unleashed the flash sword technique and charged forward without hesitation. Swish! A shadow clone, previously locked in battle across the field, abruptly halted its spellcasting. Without waiting for Nathan's command, it abandoned its opponent and raced toward Hozuki Zangetsu, poised to strike from a new angle. Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. As always, partnering with my own shadow clone proved unbeatable. Having inherited my memories and fighting style, the clone anticipated every move, never missing an opportunity to act when it counted most. Without a word, the handoff was complete, and Takashima Ichiro found himself trapped. Ichiro's face had gone ghostly pale from blood loss. Seizing the moment, Nathan lunged forward and slashed his kunai toward Ichiro's exposed side. The sharp blades met with a ringing clash. A shock of force shot up Ichiro's arm, numbing it instantly and forcing him to stumble back a half step. That retreat was all Nathan needed. He pressed his advantage without hesitation, closing the distance in a heartbeat. With his second kunai poised at Ichiro's throat, Nathan unleashed his signature illusion sword technique, striking with dazzling speed and precision, ready to end the fight in a single, decisive double blow. Takashima Ichiro may have been low on chakra, but he was still a jonin, and his battlefield instincts told him not to make the same mistake twice. The instant he sensed something was off, he bit his tongue, using the shock of pain to shatter the illusion's hold. Nathan's trick hadn't worked. Clang! His blade rang against Nathan's kunai, sending sparks scattering through the air. The impact shoved Ichiro backward, and he seized the moment to distance himself, only to find that Nathan had already vanished. A faint green glow had flickered around the younger shinobi, and in the next heartbeat, he was gone. Instant sword technique again? Ichiro muttered under his breath. He'd seen Nathan teleport like this several times already, and knew exactly what to expect. Spreading his awareness across the clearing, he began to hunt for the faintest trace of his opponent. Years of reconnaissance missions had honed Ichiro's senses to a razor's edge. While most ninja would struggle to follow such a rapid displacement, he merely closed his eyes and let his intuition guide him, certain he would pick up Nathan's trail. Nathan's only option was to keep dodging. He stood no chance against Ichiro in a straight fight, and Ichiro never offered him room to retreat. Caught in this relentless back and forth, Nathan knew the old adage held true. If you defend long enough, you eventually break. Each successive strike from Ichiro made defense harder and harder. Meanwhile, Nathan's Sharingan worked like a cold, unblinking machine, tracking patterns, predicting angles, hunting for a single opening. 3 minutes crawled by under the assault. Then, in one fluid motion as Ichiro's blade whistled past, Nathan's eyes flared. He'd found it. Without pausing, he flicked his wrist, pulling several shuriken from their pouches and hurling them in rapid succession. Swish, swish, swish. The razor-shaped stars sliced through the air. Ever vigilant, Ichiro spotted the first one, but with no Sharingan of his own, he couldn't instantly calculate the paths of all three. But years of combat experience told Ichiro that Nathan had sealed off his only escape route. A reckless dodge wouldn't just fail, it could make things far worse. Gripping his kunai, Ichiro met the incoming shuriken head-on, slashing it out of the air. Still, he kept one eye on Nathan. This wasn't mere interference, but the setup for something bigger. Sure enough, as Ichiro knocked the shuriken aside, he saw Nathan's fingers snap into a hand seal. With a deep breath, Nathan unleashed a powerful ninjutsu, fire style, dragon flame technique. A jet of flame burst from Nathan's mouth, spiraling into a blazing red dragon that barreled toward Ichiro. Fresh from his deflection, Ichiro felt his chakra reserves depleted and new energy still coalescing. He couldn't form a defensive jutsu in time. With no better option, he he dove sideways, praying he could avoid the dragon's fiery jaws. Boom! A fiery dragon tore into the earth, carving out a charred crater as debris of soil and gravel exploded outward. Chunks of earth rained down, some striking Takashima Ichiro, but he scarcely noticed. The real threat was already hurtling toward him. In the next instant, a barrage of burning spheres blazed through the air. Nathan had unleashed his fire-style, Phoenix Fire technique at full power. Before, when his shadow clone employed ninjutsu, its Sharingan-guided attacks suffered from slight inaccuracy. It simply couldn't match the original's precision. Now, with Nathan himself directing the assault, every fireball was locked unerringly on its mark. Ichiro darted to the left, then the right, narrowly evading the first volley. The fireballs moved as though they had eyes of their own, relentlessly homing in on him. Only his quick reflexes and the projectile's limited capacity to sharply alter course spared him from instant defeat. He skirted the flames, heart-pounding, yet survival felt fleeting. No sooner had he caught his breath than Nathan struck again. Without pause, another wave of Phoenix fireballs rained down, and this time, the jutsu was accompanied by a hidden volley of razor-sharp shuriken. Caught between searing fire and slicing steel, Ichiro found no opening to evade. The attack closed in, and for the first time, he realized he might not escape unscathed. The red-hot shuriken streaked across Takashima Ichiro's waist and abdomen like a bolt of lightning, carving a smoking wound as his scream tore through the haze. In the same instant, Nathan unleashed a volley of fireballs that engulfed him completely. When the conflagration subsided, only a charred husk remained. Nathan stepped forward, his boots crunching on the ashen ground. Ichiro fought to lift his head, eyes blazing with defiance and pain. With calm precision, Nathan let a razor-sharp kunai spring from his palm. It sliced through the smoke and buried itself in Ichiro's heart. Ichiro's pupils fluttered wide in agony. "You," he rasped, voice strangled by pain, before his body went limp. The corpse's hand spasmed open, revealing a burning detonator talisman. In the next heartbeat, it detonated with a deafening roar. A crimson fireball roared outward, obliterating everything in its path. Nathan raised an arm, shielding his face from the scorching blast and swirling debris. When the dust finally settled, he stood motionless, eyes fixed on the smoking ruin before him. Though the man trembled with fear, his bold attempt to bring Nathan down deserved a grudging nod of respect. Still, an enemy remained an enemy, and Nathan would grant him no mercy.